Chapter 193. Divine Palace Talisman Wei Liwa first asked her two junior martial brothers to carry the unconscious Fu Yuqing to her master. Then she raised her wrist and took out a jade whistle. She placed it by her lips and blew it lightly. A clear cry of a crane came from the peak of the mountain. Two white cranes with black tails and crowns flew down. When they saw Wei Lihua, they were extremely happy. They spread their wings and legs, craned their necks and nodded their heads, and danced around her. Wei Lihua smiled and said, "These two fellows are here to make fun of me again." Zhang Yan took a few glances at them and smiled as well. "Are these the spirit birds that fellow Taoist is raising?" Wei Lihua nodded lightly and said, "Founding Master was originally a disciple of Nanhua sect. Our Mystic Spirit Mountains disciples are of the same lineage. We all like to raise spirit birds and strange beasts. Now that our Clear Feather sect is about to be established, even though we haven't set any rules, there are still many taboos. These spirit cranes have been living in the mountain for a long time, so they know where they can go and where they can't. That's why I called them over for fellow Taoists to ride on." After that, she chose one of the spirit cranes and rode on it. She waved her hand and said, "Fellow Taoist, please follow me." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment." He made a hand seal and sent a voice note into the sea boat. Only then did he get on the crane's back. He felt that the feathers were soft as if he was sitting on a soft cushion. The spirit crane below him said with a clear female voice, "Fellow Taoist, please sit tight." Seeing that the crane could speak even before it transformed, Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, feel free to show me what you're capable of." The spirit crane let out a clear cry and took a few steps forward. It flapped its wings and soared into the sky. With a few flaps of its wings, it arrived above the clouds. Wei Liwa also rode on the crane and flew side by side with Zhang Yan. She patted the spirit crane beneath her and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you wondering why they can speak?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This must be a secret technique passed down in your sect, but I'm curious. Since your sect has such a technique, and the Peng beside fellow Gua is quite spirited, why don't I see it speaking?" The crane beneath him suddenly said, "Dao brother, are you talking about martial Uncle Gua's rattling tongue?" Zhang Yan asked with interest, "Oh, do you know the reason?" The crane laughed and said, "I don't know if Dao brother asks about other things, but I do know about this matter. This old fellow has always had a loud voice and doesn't care about what he says. He often scolds the disciples until they are black and blue all over. Unfortunately, he is Martial Uncle Gua's mount and no one can do anything to him." Eventually, Martial Uncle Gua felt that he was too noisy and simply sealed his mouth so that he can't speak nonsense. Our ears were also much quieter. At this point, it seemed to be taking pleasure in the rock's misfortune. It must have suffered quite a bit from the rock. Wei Lihua pretended to be unhappy and said, "Xiao Yi, you seem to talk a lot too." The spirit crane was shocked and said with grievance, "My dear wife, don't blame me. Xiao Yi is a taciturn gourd. There's usually no one to talk to here and it's really boring. That's why I can't help but say a few more words." Wei Lihua smiled lightly and said, "The founding master is about to open the sect. In the future, when the sect grows stronger, it won't be restricted to this close land anymore. There will be a day when you can spread your wings and soar high." The relationship between the spirit bird and its owner was one where the bird thrived and the owner suffered. If the owner's cultivation level was profound and he strived to improve, his status would naturally rise. If the owner was a ride master who didn't seek to improve, then he could only blame himself for being unlucky. As Zhang Yan and Wei Lihua chatted happily, the spirit crane carried the two of them to a valley filled with lush greenery, birdsong, and the fragrance of flowers. At this moment, a ray of light flew out from an octagonal pavilion on the opposite cliff. A round-faced woman in a green dress stepped on a beautiful flying handkerchief and approached them. She said in surprise, "Senior Martial Sister Wei, you've returned." She then looked at Zhang Yan with her bright eyes and said, "Which island is this senior martial brother from? I've never seen you before." This woman looked to be around 27 or 28 years old. Her cheeks were bright red, her almond-shaped eyes were alluring, and her figure was enchanting like a ripe peach. Zhang Yan took a look and knew that she was a demon cultivator. Wei Liwa hurriedly said, Junior Martial Sister Fu, this is fellow Taoist Zhang. He's a good friend of Martial Uncle Gua. He's also here to watch the ceremony. Junior Martial Sister Fu smiled charmingly at Zhang Yan and bowed. So it's fellow Taoist Zhang's good friend. I'm Fu Hongyu. Greetings, fellow Taoist Yang. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and bowed his head in greeting. Wei Lihua pointed at the woman and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't look down on Junior Martial Sister Fu. She's the head housekeeper of our mystic spirit mountain. Junior Martial Sister Fu laughed and her eyes were like crescent moons. She said, What head housekeeper? I'm just running an errand on behalf of the elders and fellow disciples. Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't listen to Senior Martial Sister Wei's nonsense. She went up and held Wei Lihua's arm affectionately. Since Senior Martial Sister has returned, why don't you stay here for a few days? Wei Lihua patted her arm and sighed. I'd like that too. It's just that I've only just returned and fellow Taoist Zhang's accommodation was personally arranged by Martial Uncle Gua. I haven't had the time to go back and see my master. Oh? That's a pity. Junior Martial Sister Fu raised her eyebrows. She glanced at Zhang Yan and said, Senior Martial Sister Wei, Senior Martial Brother Zhang, if that's the case, come with me. She led the way and flew towards a mountain. But they hadn't taken a few steps when they saw waves of thunder rumbling and demon clouds roiling on another mountain, causing Zhang Yan to be unable to help but take a few more glances. Wei Lihua was surprised as well. What's going on there? Junior Martial Sister Fu curled her lips and said, Senior Martial Sister Wei, you don't know. Next month, when the Ancestral Master opens the sect, Fourth Martial Uncle invited many demon kings and rogue cultivators to attend the ceremony. These people are used to messing around and fight every other day. They must be fighting again. We don't have to pay attention to them. She swung her waist and drove the flying handkerchief forward. In less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, she pushed down the cloud and landed in front of a cave abode. She turned around and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Zhang, what do you think of this place? Zhang Yan got off the spirit crane and stood still. He looked around and saw that this place was surrounded by green pines and cypresses. There was a pavilion that leaped out of the warm cliff, looking quite elegant. Below it was a gurgling stream, and further ahead was a magnificent waterfall. He nodded and said, This place has a unique scenery. Junior Martial Sister Fu has chosen a good place. Junior Martial Sister Fu said with a smile, as long as Senior Martial Brother is satisfied. However, Wei Lihua was still worried. She entered the Immortal's cave and looked around. Although the decorations were clean and tidy, there was nothing else on the table other than a bronze cup and a long pearl on it. She couldn't help but frown. Junior Martial Sister, why is this place so simple and crude? Junior Martial Sister Fu complained, Senior Martial Sister, don't blame me for not being diligent. It's also Senior Martial Brother Zhang who came late. These good cave abodes have all been picked by those rogue cultivators and monster kings. Go outside and take a look, where else can compare to this cave abode? Zhang Yan also walked in. He smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Wei, I think this place is very good. It's very quiet, so there's no need to be picky. Junior Martial Sister Fu's face lit up, and she said in a sweet voice, Senior Martial Brother Zhang is really considerate. You know my difficulties. Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't have any objections, Wei Lihua didn't want to be nosy. She was also in a hurry to leave, so she said, I still have to go see my master. I'll come and visit fellow Taoist another day. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, Do as you please, fellow Taoist. Wei Lihua bowed to him, then leaped up and turned into a streak of light, disappearing into the sky. Junior Martial Sister Fu saw that Wei Lihua had left, and she turned around and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, you can walk around freely when you're free, but you need to remember that the cave abodes of those monster kings are just beyond this mountain. You must not go there. Those monster kings are still proud of their status and won't bully others, but their juniors are just wild people who eat rotten meat and eat fish. They'll fight with others if they don't agree with you. If they get into a dispute with you and hurt the harmony between them, I'll be stuck in the middle. It'll be very difficult for me. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, if no one comes to provoke me, I won't meddle. Junior Marshal Sister Fu giggled and said, I know Senior Marshal Brother is a reasonable person. Senior Marshal Brother is Senior Marshal Sister Wei's honored guest, so you can be considered one of us. If there's anything else you want to tell me, I'll do my best to satisfy Senior Marshal Brother. Zhang Yan shook his head and said, there's no need for Junior Marshal Sister Fu to worry about the rest of the matters. Junior Marshal Sister Fu saw that Zhang Yan had the intention to chase her away, so she took out a talisman and said coquettishly, if Senior Marshal Brother has any orders, take this talisman and summon the old ape in the mountain. He'll be able to find me then. Once she finished speaking, she handed the talisman over to Zhang Yan. After Zhang Yan took it, she didn't say anything else and took her leave. She threw the flying handkerchief into the air, twisted her waist, and got up. Then she turned into a rainbow and returned to her immortal's cave. Not long after, she landed in front of a temple with lush flowers and plants. She lifted the hem of her skirt and was about to step inside when she saw a figure flashing out from inside. She was so frightened that she covered her chest and took 2 steps back. She said, which dead ghost dares to scare this lady? A light chuckle came from the opposite side, and a tall and slender young cultivator with red lips and white teeth appeared. He smiled and said, it's me. Did I disturb Junior Marshal Sister? Junior Marshal Sister Fu let out a sigh of relief and rolled her eyes at him. She said, so it's Senior Marshal Brother Feng. What's wrong? Are you here to ask for information again? The young cultivator smiled and said, in front of Junior Marshal Sister Fu, I naturally can't hide anything. I just passed by here and saw Senior Marshal Sister Wei leading a fellow Taoist past in a hurry. May I know what that fellow Taoist is doing here? I'll pay him a visit another day. Junior Marshal Sister Fu said disdainfully, do you think I don't know what you're up to? I'm afraid you're worried that another person will come to compete with you for the Immortal Palace Talisman, right? The young Taoist chuckled and raised his hand to pass her a small bag. Fu Hongyu looked left and right and nimbly took the bag. She put it into her fragrance pouch and patted it twice before saying in a low voice, I've also not found out about this person's background. I heard that he's a good friend of Senior Marshal Uncle Gua. The young Taoist made a sound of surprise and said, does Senior Marshal Uncle Gua also want to join in? Fu Hongyu raised her eyebrows and said, what do you mean? Why, only you are allowed to compete for the Immortal Palace Talisman, but others are not allowed to. The young Taoist smiled and said, there are a total of 48 talismans. Whether or not one can get it depends on fate. It doesn't matter if there's one more or one less person. Fu Hongyu made a sound of, oh, and glared at him. She said, Senior Marshal Brother, you're quite open-minded, but do you really think so? Without waiting for the man to speak, she flicked her sleeves and said, forget it, I don't have the patience to find out about your shady business. Pretend I didn't say anything. But you must remember that this person was brought here by Senior Marshal Sister Wei, so you have to give me some face. At least during the few days I'm on duty, you guys are not allowed to provoke him. The young Taoist's eyes darted around and he readily agreed, since Junior Marshal Sister Fu has spoken, I'll naturally listen to you. But, he chuckled and said, even if my Senior Marshal brothers don't go, I'm afraid there'll be people who can't help but weigh his weight. Target equals _blank. Chapter 194. Opening the sack. The demon concubine's provocation. Inside the cave, Zhang Yan sat on a praying mat and breathed out spiritual breath from his mouth and nose. He trapped a shiny sleeve in the clear air and made it roll back and forth with the breath. However, every few moments, the sleeve would struggle and twist, as if the true consciousness inside was unwilling to bow down and admit defeat. For the past few days, Zhang Yan had repeatedly refined this item and had already gotten rid of all the impurities inside. However, deep inside the sleeve, there was still a mass of spiritual essence. This was the accumulation of Xiao Han's blood and sweat. It seemed that he had used some secret technique. Even though this person had died long ago, he was still using the sleeve to defend himself. It was very stubborn and firm. Zhang Yan had tried many gentle techniques before, but none of them could completely get rid of it. However, if he were to use a violent method, he was afraid that he would destroy the item inside the sleeve as well. That would not be worth it. Therefore, he decided to use the water refining technique to slowly get rid of it. After continuously refining for several days and nights, there was finally only a trace of essence left in the sleeve, and it had already reached the most crucial step. The sleeve began to tremble under the pressure of his spiritual essence. Then, it began to violently struggle as if it was making a final struggle. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He knew that the time had come. He shouted and continuously breathed out a few mouthfuls of spiritual essence. These few mouthfuls of spiritual essence were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. After a few sizzling sounds, the sleeve wailed and a wisp of green smoke came out. With a puff sound, it fell to the ground. Zhang Yan laughed loudly and waved his sleeve to get rid of the filthy spiritual essence. With a wave of his hand, he took the sleeve into his hand. There was a slight smile on his lips. After spending a lot of time and effort, he had finally completely refined this item today. He hoped that the item hidden inside would not disappoint him. He adjusted his breathing for a moment and unhurriedly stretched out his hand. He shook open the lock and slowly undid the sleeve. His mind went in to investigate and he couldn't help but feel refreshed. This item was worthy of being a Xian artifact. It was very different from the sleeve he used before. This pouch was divided into 3 gates: heaven, earth, and man. The items were placed according to different categories and were not mixed together like the sleeve pouch he used. He first took out the things from the human gate and placed them on the table. After counting carefully, he found that there were more than 3,000 high-quality spiritual shells, more than 100 smooth and warm sea spirit pearls, and a lot of jade talisman. Other than that, the rest were some miscellaneous items, such as gold and silver utensils, robes, and headbands. There were many types of these items, and they were not rare items. Therefore, Zhang Yan glanced over them in a hurry, and with a roll of his sleeve, he put them away. After leaving this place, he went to open the earth gate and poured out all the items hidden within. His eyes couldn't help but light up. There were elixirs, spirit waters, animal bones, medicinal herbs, and rare zoysia grasses. They filled the table, big and small. He looked around and reached out to take a bottle. After opening it, he put it in front of his nose and smelled it. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. It's actually the Life Marrow Great Virtue Ointment. It's good stuff, but it's rare. The Life Marrow Great Virtue Ointment was a top-grade medicine. It could not only be used to connect broken limbs and regenerate flesh and bones. Even if one's limbs were crippled, as long as one took enough of the ointment within 2 hours, one's vitality could be stimulated and broken limbs could be regrown. He identified all the medicines one by one and found that they were all rare elixirs. The Shao clan was indeed a big business. Just a junior disciple already had so many good things. In the end, he picked up an inconspicuous porcelain bottle and smelled it. He was startled and then he laughed. With just this item, the few days' effort was not wasted. There was only one elixir in the bottle, and it was called 5 Heart Yang Restoration Pill. This pill was one of the 36 precious pills in the world. As long as one took 1 pill in advance under the tongue, even if the physical body was greatly damaged, it could still ensure that one would not die for a while. Even if one was beheaded, as long as the body could be reattached in time, one's life could still be extended. This pill was extremely precious, and the recipe had long been lost. As far as he knew, Zhou Chongju only had 4 of them. If he sold this pill, it would not be too much to get a profound-level weapon. Zhang Yan thought to himself, just the Earth Gate alone has such precious items. I wonder what's hidden in the Heaven Gate? He felt a little more anticipation in his heart. He put away the bottles and jars on the table and opened the Heavenly Gate's security lock. As soon as he loosened the restraints of the restriction, several treasures and auspicious lights appeared, and he could not help but squint his eyes under the light. He urged his mind and released one of the items. A black python flew out, and with a twist in the air, it turned into a 6-feet-long flag. He reached out and took it. He shook it, and there seemed to be the sound of waves in his ears. He sent a breath of spiritual qi into it and refined it slightly. After a careful examination, he knew the origin of this item. This flag was a spiritual weapon refined by the elders of the Qinsong school. It was specially given to meritorious disciples. It was called Tri-Elements Mixed Water Flag. When used, one only needed to shake it, and the waves could be divided and gathered. With this item in hand, going into the deep sea alone would be like walking on flat ground. This magic weapon could not be used to fight enemies. Zhang Yan only played with it for a while before putting it away. He took out another item and casually flipped it over. It was actually another magic weapon given by the Qinsong school. This item was called Zhu Yuan Yingxing 3 Qi Palace Guard Flag. It was a set of formation flags used by cultivators to protect themselves when they went out to travel. This flag had a total of 16 sides. As long as the formation was arranged, it could gather the vigorous and thick qi of heaven and earth to resist external enemies. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. This item was quite practical. In the future, it would come in handy when he traveled in the wilderness. Just as he was about to continue to investigate, he felt that the overflowing spiritual qi in the cave residence was gradually weakening. Looking up, he found that the more than 100 spirit shells that were originally surrounding him had already dimmed, and their bright surface was also gray and dull. He waved his sleeves expressionlessly and swept these spirit shells aside. He took out hundreds of spirit shells from his sleeves and rearranged them beside him. After all, the Xianling mountain under his feet was made by Tao Jinren. Therefore, there was no spiritual vein. It only relied on the operation of the formation to extract spiritual vigor. However, most of the spiritual vigor was divided by Tao Jinren's disciples and the demon kings who came to the island to watch the ceremony. There was very little spiritual vigor here. This was also one of the reasons why Wei Lihua was previously dissatisfied with this cave residence arranged by Fu Hongyu. However, when a cultivator traveled outside, if there was no suitable cave residence for cultivation, he could take out the spirit shell to absorb the spiritual qi in it. He could still cultivate properly. Usually, the spiritual qi in a spirit shell was enough for a Ming Qi cultivator to use for 3 to 5 days. For Zhang Yan's level, 7 or 8 spirit shells were only enough for him to use for a day. However, he was rich, so he did not feel the pinch when using it. At this moment he heard a squeaking sound outside the cave. He could not help but smile. He kept his sleeves and said, "Fellow Taoist, please come in." A white shadow flashed in front of the cave abode. A white-haired old ape was holding a jade plate with many fresh fruits and a bottle of fine wine on it. It walked in obediently like a human and placed the jade plate on the table. It cupped its hands and said, "Please enjoy, fellow Taoist. I'll take my leave now." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and the old ape slowly retreated. Zhang Yan looked down and shook his head with a smile. At his level of cultivation, he had already abstained from eating to prolong his life. He wanted to refuse, but the old ape said that this was an order from Fu Hongyu. If it did not treat the esteemed guest well, it would be punished, so he could not refuse. At this moment, a rumbling sound came from afar. The jade plate on the table jumped along with it, but he did not seem to hear it. These days, conveyance lights danced in the sky on the opposite mountain every day, and there were endless battles. However, he was focused on cultivating and did not pay attention to it. He took out his sleeves again. There were only 3 treasures in the heavenly gate. He had already taken out the banners and formation flags, so there was only one item that he had not looked at yet. He probed inside with his consciousness and discovered a white light lying quietly inside. He couldn't see what it was, so he activated his spiritual qi and released the white light. Unexpectedly, the white light suddenly let out a whistling sound and flew up, slashing at his body. Zhang Yan had already seen clearly that it was only a spirit tool. It was just that it seemed to be possessed by the soul essence of some monster, so it did not listen to him. He sneered and sat still. There was a clang, and the light only cut a white mark on his neck. Seeing that it could not do anything to Zhang Yan, the thing was also frightened, so it turned around and scuttled out of the cave residence. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and shouted, "How can I let you leave?" He opened his sleeve and put away his sleeve pouch. Then he leaped up and followed after Chuli. At this moment, outside the cave residence, there was a chariot that came on a cloud and landed on the top of the mountain. There were a dozen people standing on the chariot, a man and a woman. The man was handsome, but there was a hint of evil in his eyes. It was Senior Marshal Brother Feng, who asked about Zhang Yan from Fu Hongyu. The woman was a young married woman. Her hair was tied up high, and her skin was whiter than snow. She had a willowy waist, and her movements revealed a flirtatious charm. The woman looked around with her beautiful eyes and said with a sweet voice, "Fellow Feng, was this the place you were talking about?" Senior Marshal Brother Feng smiled and said, "Lady Jade, what do you think of this place?" Lady Jade said lazily, "It can be considered passable. That mountain is fighting and killing all day long, and it is really too noisy. This place is quiet, and it is barely livable." Senior Marshal Brother Feng looked ahead and pretended to be surprised. He said, When I came here 2 days ago, I didn't see anyone living here. How did it become occupied in a flash of 2 days?" Lady Jade glanced at Senior Marshal Brother Feng and said lightly, "Just chase them away. There isn't even a cave residence with spirit chi. What kind of amazing person can live here?" Senior Marshal Brother Feng had a plan in his heart, but he deliberately said, "I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right?" Lady Jade snorted and said impatiently, "What are you afraid of? Even if the sky falls, I will bear it." She pointed with her finger and pointed to a tall and sturdy demon cultivator behind her. She said, "Tong Bing, quickly chase this person away." The demon cultivator said in a muffled voice, "Yes, Lady Jade." He got off the carriage and walked towards the cave residence. Relying on the great background of the person behind him, he didn't report at the door and swaggered in. However, he had only taken a few steps when he saw a white light rush out. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, "Treasure!" After letting out a cry, he recklessly reached out to grab it. When the streak of light saw that someone was blocking it, it let out a cry and stretched out its body. With a cheese sound, it instantly cut the person in half. The demon cultivator screamed and died on the spot. Outside the cave residence, Lady Jade's pretty face changed when she heard this. Then she saw the white light fly out and her beautiful eyes lit up. She said happily, "Good treasure, I want it." However, as soon as his voice trailed off, a streak of light flew out and engulfed the streak of light. Lady Jade was startled, and her cheeks instantly turned bright red. Her face was full of anger as she shouted, "Taoist, what kind of magic treasure is that? How can you take it for yourself? Hurry up and hand it over to this empress." Target equals _blank. Chapter 195. People die for wealth, birds die for food. Zhang Yan's 2 fingers clamped down on the white light, but the thing was still struggling. Sometimes it would emit a 3-foot-long light, and sometimes it would shrink into a 2-finger-wide light. However, no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't escape. This magic treasure had such spirituality. Lady Jade and Senior Brother Feng were envious. But seeing that Zhang Yan didn't care about them, Lady Jade was furious. She put on a stern face and shouted, "Taoist, did you hear my question?" Zhang Yan sat on the cloud and looked at Lady Jade. He said indifferently, "Are you confused? This place was formed by Tao Zhenren using his power to gather the earth into a mountain. It has only been 20 years. How can there be a treasure appearing?" Lady Jade's face turned red. If this treasure appeared, it could have been hidden underground or under the sea for hundreds or thousands of years. If there really was a treasure here, it would have escaped long ago or Tao Zhenren took it. There was no third possibility. She saw that the magic treasure was extraordinary and her heart was burning with greed. She was impulsive and spoke without thinking. But she was usually flattered in the palace and developed a rude temperament. How could she allow others to question her? She immediately argued, "What a joke! You think it's yours just because you say it's yours? Then why couldn't you control it and let it escape? Perhaps some expert once resided in this immortal's cave and deliberately left this magic treasure behind to await fate. Now that I've arrived here, this item is in such a hurry to come out. It's clearly fated with me, yet it was snatched away by you, little thief. Hurry up and hand it over." Zhang Yan sneered and said, "This treasure is arrogant and unruly. I was careless and allowed it to escape. Fellow Taoist, you only took a look at it and you said it was yours. How unreasonable! Consort Jade was about to retort when senior brother Feng shook his head and thought to himself, although Consort Jade's charm arts are impressive and managed to bewitch Demon King Xian Tong, her brain isn't that good. Why is she bickering with this person? Now is the time for you to bully others. Why is there a need to reason? He coughed and said in a low voice, Lady Jade, why are you arguing with him? This person killed Tong Bing. No matter what, he is still your servant. How can we let this go? We need to demand justice from him. With this reminder, Lady Jade immediately came to her senses and scolded, Taoist, you killed my servant. What crime do you think you deserve? Zhang Yan sneered, your servant barged into someone else's cave abode and deserved to be killed. I haven't asked you for not disciplining him. Lady Jade had always been favored by Demon King Xian Tong. No one had ever dared to go against her wishes. Now that she was rebutted by Zhang Yan, her chest tightened and her lips trembled. Senior martial brother Feng chuckled and stood up. Fellow Taoist, you have to think carefully. Do you know who this Lady Jade is? She is Demon King Xian Tong's Taoist companion. I advise you to lower your head and hand over the treasure. If not, once the Demon King is furious, it will be too late for regrets. Zhang Yan didn't care about them. He said a few more words to them because he was afraid that the Dharma treasure would take the opportunity to escape again. Yet now, this magic treasure had already been suppressed by him to the point of being unable to move, so he shouted right away before enveloping it with dark light and tossing it back into his sleeve. At this moment, he didn't have any more worries and said indifferently, I don't care who you are or what background you have. If you want to seize my magic treasure, then feel free to ask the sword ball in my hand. Lady Jade suddenly shrieked, Are you all dead? Take down this Taoist, pull out his tendons, pull out his bones, cut out his heart, and dig out his liver to go with the wine of the old master. As soon as she said this, two Taoists with mouse whiskers stood out. One of them had a sword on his left and the other had a sword on his right, but they looked exactly the same. They were a pair of twin brothers and were rogue cultivators in the East Sea. They were taught by a strange person when they were young and later became Demon King Xian Tong's followers. Seeing that the two of them were good at using flying swords together and were mystic light cultivators, they were specially sent to protect Lady Jade. The two of them stood side by side and stared at Zhang Yan. They cut their fingers and formed a spell while chanting. Two sword hums were heard and the two flying swords were unsheathed. They turned into two rays of light in the air and slashed towards Zhang Yan like lightning. Zhang Yan saw that the two swords were mixed and impure. Even when the swords were unsheathed, blood was needed to be sacrificed. It was extremely evil. It was obvious that the swords were not taught properly. With one look, he could tell that it was an unorthodox technique. He sneered and shook his shoulder. A ball of mysterious light that was more than 600 feet wide burst out from the top of his head. There were 3 colors of light coming out from it. The blue mist was like a dense fog, the golden light was like the sunset, and the blazing fire was like the red clouds. The 3 lights were entangled together, but they did not interfere with each other. Upon seeing the 2 flying swords flying toward it, the ball of profound light swelled up and engulfed them. With a few crackling sounds, sparks flew in the mysterious light, and the raging fire clamored. In just a moment, these 2 high-quality flying swords were stirred into a pile of scrap iron. They spun a few more times in the light, and in the end, not even a scrap was left. In the past, when these 2 Taoists used their flying swords to attack their enemies, even if the other party used mysterious light to block, they would be torn apart with one sword. There was no exception, so they were very confident. They didn't expect the Tai mysterious light to be so powerful. A moment of carelessness caused their natal flying swords to be destroyed. Their minds were severely injured and they cried out in pain. They fell to the ground on their backs and blood flowed out of their 7 orifices. Their limbs twitched and it looked like they were going to die. Lady Jade's horizons had been broadened, but when had she ever seen a mystic light destroy a Dharma treasure? Her almond-shaped eyes were wide open and her mouth was slightly agape. Her face was filled with disbelief. When the people behind her saw what happened to the 2 Taoists, they were also shocked. The mysterious light released by Zhang Yan was extremely domineering and shocked the group of people on the spot. Senior martial brother Feng was also shocked and thought to himself, "What Dao technique is this? How is it so powerful? To be able to destroy a magical treasure with mysterious light, this is not something an ordinary itinerant cultivator can do. This person is either from a large Shenmen sect or has a great celestial fate." He wanted to find a few people to test Zhang Yan's strength and see if he was invited by Guolai to compete with them for the Immortal Palace decree. Therefore, he encouraged Lady Jade, who had a strong background but was not very smart, to come here. If Zhang Yan was useless, he could rest assured. If he was capable and angered Lady Jade, he could get Demon King Shen Tong to come out and get rid of him. He thought to himself, "Looks like my previous worries were not wrong. This person's background is probably not simple, and he is a variable. I need to report this matter to my master in time, in case there are any mistakes when the Celestial Palace is opened." Since he had found out that Zhang Yan was not someone to be trifled with, he might as well retreat for the time being. Therefore, he said, "Lady Jade, this person's cultivation is not shallow. He is not here to fight. We do not have powerful magical treasures and may not be able to defeat him. Why don't we retreat for the time being and ask Demon King Tong to come and help you?" Seeing Zhang Yan's power, Lady Jade could not help but panic and wanted to retreat. However, she had always been arrogant and had never suffered such grievances. Therefore, she said to Zhang Yan fiercely, "You Taoist, just you wait. When I return, I will definitely teach you a lesson." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he shouted, "Leave? Not so easy." He once told Fu Hongyu that if others did not provoke him, he would not meddle. However, if others bullied him, they could not blame him for not showing mercy. Moreover, if he let this woman go, she would definitely ask Demon King Shen Tong to come and make things difficult for him. Since he had to fight anyway, he might as well deal with these people here and take the initiative. Thinking of this, his heart was filled with murderous intent. The sword pill hidden in his primal aperture was activated by his murderous intent. It let out a long and clear cry and leaped out from between his eyebrows. Immediately, it turned into a rainbow and soared up. For a moment, the sword intent surged and the bright light was like a wash. A biting cold air spread in all directions. Senior brother Feng saw that when Zhang Yan attacked with his sword, he knew it was an orthodox Shenmen. Moreover, at this moment, the murderous intent was so strong that he knew it was not good. He hesitated for a moment and quietly took a few steps back. Then, he suddenly rode the conveyance light and flew towards the clouds. Zhang Yan's mind was activated and the stellar sword pill immediately turned into a pure sword light. In an instant, it traversed tens of feet in the void and slashed towards Lady Jade. Lady Jade was stunned. She had always been domineering and knew that no matter where she went, no one dared to not give face to Demon King Shen Tong. She did not think that someone would dare to attack her and did not think of dodging. However, right at this moment, a dark green jade bracelet on her hand suddenly flew off her wrist and blocked the path of the sword light. A clear sound rang out as the jade bracelet was instantly broken into two. However, with this delay, she woke up with a start and couldn't help but let out a sharp cry. In a panic, she picked up the talisman and shook it, causing the flying carriage beneath her to instantly soar into the sky. It was obvious that she was about to flee. However, before she could reach the top of the cloud, Zhang Yan had already released all 365 drops of serene in heavy water. With a point of his finger, the heavy water instantly gathered into a mighty wave and swept upwards. In an instant, it caught up and wrapped around Lady Jade and the rest. After a few more spins, only screams and screams could be heard from within. Including Lady Jade, all of them had broken bones and flesh. They fell from the sky and for a moment, no one knew if they were dead or alive. Senior brother Feng did not see the tragic state of Lady Jade and the rest. In his mind, he thought that if he left first, Zhang Yan would be attracted by Lady Jade and the rest and would not have time to care about him. He was initially confident, but when he inadvertently looked back, he was scared out of his wits. He saw that in the vast clouds, there was an exquisite sword light tearing through the air. Only now did he know why it was said that fighting with sword cultivators was the most dangerous. The speed of this sword escape was really unimaginable. In just a few breaths, it had shortened the distance by a large margin. Zhang Yan looked ahead with a cold gaze. Since he had already made a move, he had to do it to the extreme. He could not let anyone escape. Senior brother Feng saw that Zhang Yan was getting closer and he secretly cried out in his heart. He said, "This person did not chase after Lady Jade first and came to kill me. What kind of logic is this? Could it be that he knows that I was the one who secretly urged him to do this?" However, he did not expect that Lady Jade and the rest could not even last one round in front of Zhang Yan. However, there was no time for him to let his imagination run wild. He could only grit his teeth and endure. He just had to go over this mountain in front of him and it would be where the disciples of Clear Plume sect cultivated. He really did not believe that Zhang Yan would have the guts to chase after him. Target equals _blank. Chapter 196. Demon King Xian Tong's senior martial brother Feng tried his best to escape, but the more he ran, the more uneasy he felt. The ray of light behind him was too fast. In the blink of an eye, it had closed the distance between them. It would not be long before it caught up with him. The mountain ahead seemed to be a short distance away, yet it felt far beyond reach. At this critical moment, he didn't have the time to hesitate, so he gritted his teeth and withdrew a white feather from his sleeve before fiercely blowing a mouthful of spirit energy onto it. After being nourished by the spiritual energy, the white feather seemed to have gained sentience. It trembled fiercely and struggled free from his hand. In a split second, it turned into a mass of smoke and enveloped him. Then, it turned into a streak of white light and flew away. With this help, his speed was more than twice as fast as before. In just a few breaths, he would cross the mountain. Zhang Yan saw senior martial brother Feng desperately fleeing in one direction, and he could guess that there must be something behind that mountain. He sneered, and the profound qi around his body surged. The escape light under his body suddenly burst out with a deafening sound, breaking through the atmosphere. In the sky, a flickering stream of light that was as fast as lightning chased after him. Just as he was about to catch up to the other party, a wisp of white smoke rose from the jade peak below, separating the two of them. Zhang Yan felt a gentle push on his body, and a gentle voice said in his ear, "Fellow Taoist, please have mercy." The mana in this smoke was strong, but it was not hot, and there was not a trace of hostility. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he calmly turned around. When he stopped, he saw a beautiful Taoist nun in black with white hair standing on top of the white smoke. She wore a high crown and had a horsetail whisk in her hand. She looked at him with a slight smile and said, "Forgive me for being rude, but are you fellow Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan was surprised. He stood on the cloud and returned the greeting, "Yes, I am. May I know your name?" The nun placed the horsetail whisk on her arm and bowed, "I am Wang Yingfeng. You must have heard of me from my eldest senior brother." Hearing this name, Zhang Yan immediately knew who she was. This nun was Tao Zhenren's third disciple. She was originally a demon cultivator from the East Sea, but Tao Zhenren saw that she was strong, so he took her in as a disciple. It was said that Taoist Master Tao had only wanted her to be an in-name disciple. The reason she had been able to successfully enter the sect was all because of Guolai's help. Thus, in the Clear Feather sect, this Taoist nun was the closest to Guolai, so it was not strange that she knew his name. Zhang Yan saw that this Taoist nun's eyebrows were green, her skin was like ice and her bones were like jade, her entire body was filled with qi of Tao, but unexpectedly he could not detect any demonic aura. He knew that this person must have received the orthodox teachings of the Shenmen sect and was not an ordinary demonic cultivator. He smiled and said, "So it's Taoist Wang. Fellow Taoist Guo has often mentioned you. Seeing you today, you really have the beauty of an immortal." Wang Yingfeng hurriedly said, "You flatter me. Fellow Taoist, you flatter me." Senior brother Feng had gotten Wang Yingfeng's help and calmed down. He thought that he had escaped with his life, but now that he heard that the two of them were friends, he became nervous again. Wang Yingfeng glanced at him, shook her head, and said with slight disappointment, "This martial nephew of mine, Feng Yao, usually loves to stir up trouble everywhere, and I'm well aware of his temper. May I know how he has offended fellow this time? Zhang Yan smiled and told her the whole story. Wang Yingfang frowned slightly. In all fairness, there was nothing wrong with Zhang Yan's action. Not to mention on Xianling Island, even if it was anywhere else, if you dared to steal someone else's treasure, you deserved it and could not blame others. Feng Yao saw that she was unhappy and cursed in his heart. He hurriedly shouted, "Martial Uncle Wang, please listen to me. Lady Jade was just not familiar with the island's paths, so she invited me to go with her. She also wanted to steal this fellow's treasure on the spur of the moment. How would I know that she would do this? This matter is just a disaster for the fish in the moat. How unjust." Wang Yingfang did not pay attention to him. She pondered for a while and said to Zhang Yan, "To be honest, I am familiar with this martial nephew Feng's master. That life-saving feather was given to him by me. Now that he is in front of me, I can't leave him in the lurch. I hope fellow Taoist can give I some face and let him go." Zhang Yan smiled gently and said, "Since Taoist Wang has spoken, I should agree. However, if I let him go, I'm afraid that he will bring people to trouble me. Although I am not afraid, I don't want to waste too much effort. I might as well kill him now." Feng Yao heard the murderous intent in his words and could not help but tremble with fear. He was afraid that Wang Yingfang would agree. Wang Yingfang hurriedly bowed and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't worry. You are also an important guest of my mystic spirit island. I will not intentionally be biased. There is no enmity between your two clans. This matter was only caused by a misunderstanding. I will temporarily let martial nephew Feng stay at my place for a few days and ask his master to come and apologize to fellow Taoist. I am willing to be a mediator and try my best to resolve this matter. What do you think, fellow Taoist?" This Wang Yingfang was a core formation cultivator, but she did not use her cultivation to bully others. Instead, she calmly discussed with Zhang Yan. Because of Guo Lai, Zhang Yan could not be too aggressive. He smiled and nodded, saying, "This method is fine. I will listen to fellow Taoist's suggestion." When Feng Yao heard this, he secretly let out a long sigh of relief. He was glad that he had escaped a disaster. However, when he relaxed, he felt sorry for the flying feather that he had used. Wang Yingfang had only refined 24 of these feathers and distributed them to her disciples and good friends. It was only because his master was on good terms with Wang Yingfang that he managed to get one. Feng Yao did not expect that he would use it before he could even warm his hands. As soon as the two of them came to an agreement, the atmosphere in the room immediately relaxed. Wang Yingfang said with a smile, "May I know where fellow Taoist Zhang is staying at now?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "My cave is right across from where the Monster Kings are staying." Wang Yingfang only needed to think carefully to know where Zhang Yan was talking about. She frowned and said, "The spiritual energy in that cave is thin. How can people live there?" She shook her head again and said, "Eldest senior brother has always been careless. This time, I have neglected fellow Taoist. My Swan Goose Temple is considered to be rich in spiritual energy. If fellow Taoist doesn't mind, why don't you stay at my place for a few days?" When Zhang Yan heard this, his heart moved slightly. This Wang Yingfang clearly knew that he had beaten Lady Jade to the point of death, but she still wanted him to stay. It was obvious that she wanted to stand up for him and take responsibility for this matter. However, he was a guest on Xianling Island and was disturbed. Wang Yingfang's action was reasonable, so he smiled and said, "Then I will have to trouble fellow Taoist." At this moment, in a luxurious cave residence on Xianling Island, Lady Jade was lying on the bed and moaning weakly. She looked like she was on her last breath. Beside her sat a scholar in a white robe. This person's eyebrows reached his temples, his nose bridge pierced through his forehead, and his appearance was rather heroic. He was one of the 18 monster kings of the East Sea, Demon King Xian Tong, Tong Ming. He took out a red elixir and fed it to Lady Jade. Then he stood up and asked a tall woman with exquisite features, "You said that person's name is Zhang Yan, and he used the sword escape technique?" This woman was his younger sister, Tong Ying. She immediately replied, "Yes, this is what I asked someone to find out. There is no mistake." Demon King Xian Tong looked thoughtful, as if he was thinking about something. After Lady Jade took the elixir, she slowly woke up. When she saw Demon King Xian Tong, she could not help but cry. When Tong Ying saw that Demon King Xian Tong did not speak for a long time, she could not help but say, "Big brother, she is awake." Demon King Xian Tong came back to his senses and walked to Lady Jade's bed. He looked down but did not speak. Lady Jade's jade face was full of sorrow, and she said with hatred, "I was bullied for no reason. Master, please help me." Demon King Xian Tong stretched out his hand and caressed her cheek. There seemed to be infinite gentleness between his fingers. He sighed, "Huan, I have already warned you not to cause trouble when you are free. Why did you not listen?" 2 lines of tears fell from Lady Jade's eyes. She cried, "I regret not listening to Master. But this person is really despicable. He not only flirted with me, but also said a lot of things to slander Master. I was angry and could not help but quarrel with him. I did not expect him to be so ruthless." Demon King Xian Tong shook his head, "I know your temper. Now that things have come to this, why do you have to lie to me?" Lady Jade was a little flustered and she said in fear, "Master, everything I said is true." Demon King Xian Tong smiled strangely. His finger touched her throat, and then he gently slid it. To Tong Ying's disbelief, he took off Lady Jade's head. He rolled up his sleeves and kept her primordial spirit in his sleeves. Then, as if he had done something unimportant, he handed the head to Tong Ying and said, "Second sister, send Huan's head to fellow Taoist Zhang as an apology." Tong Ying stared at the head in a daze and suddenly shouted, "Big brother, how can you do this?" Demon King Xian Tong looked at her and said, "Why not?" Tong Ying pointed at Lady Jade's corpse and said agitatedly, "This person bullied your concubine, but you killed her and sent her to him as an apology. What kind of logic is this? If the other demon kings talk about this, they will definitely say that you are a coward. Where will you hide your face in the future?" Demon King Xian Tong heard this, but he was calm and did not get angry at all. He smiled and said, "What do you know?" Tong Ying said angrily, "I don't know. I just want to ask, where did Big Brother's temper and prestige go?" Demon King Xian Tong glanced at her and said, "Do you know the background of this Zhang Yan?" Tong Ying snorted and said, "Even if this person's background is extraordinary, Big Brother is also a demon king. What is there to be afraid of?" Demon King Xian Tong shook his head and said with a smile, "When you reach my level, you will know the difficulty of cultivation. You don't even have time to polish your skills. How can you have the time to waste on fighting? In these hundreds of years, when have I ever fought with anyone because of personal feelings?" Tong Ying felt bitter. Not only was she weak, but she was also unreasonable. She simply turned her head to the side and ignored him. Demon King Xian Tong sighed and said, "Now that the catastrophe of Donghua continent is coming, who dares to say that they can avoid it? I've only occasionally heard about Zhang Yan's background. He's a true disciple of the Yinsang sect, but that's not all. He's so young, yet he has a paradise in his hands. Who knows what will happen in the future? Today, he humiliated my concubine, but not only did I not blame him, I even killed her and came to apologize. He will definitely be grateful. If I'm in trouble in the future, I can ask him for help. In this king's opinion, this deal is very worth it." Tong Ying's beautiful eyes widened and she could not help but say, "Just as you said, Big Brother, but how will outsiders see us?" Tong Ming snorted and said, "Why do we come to seek Tao? Why should we care about what others think? Don't be blinded by the chaos of the mortal world. You need to know that thousands of years will pass in the blink of an eye. If I cannot live forever, everything will be fabricated. If it can help me achieve Tao, it will be worth it even if I have to give up my family business." Although Tong Ying felt that her big brother's words were reasonable, there was a sense of coldness and ruthlessness in his words. She could not help but think, Big Brother is harsh and merciless. For the sake of Tao, he is willing to sacrifice the person next to him. If one day he can exchange me for the opportunity to achieve Tao, will he abandon me without hesitation? Thinking of this, she could not help but shiver. Target equals _blank. Chapter 197. Summoned by a true person, the cave that Wang Yingfang lived in was called Swan Goose Temple. It was a floating island to the west of Xianling Mountain. This temple was built on top of a cliff. In front of the temple, there was a gurgling mountain spring, grass was everywhere, and birds and beasts were jumping and playing among the wisteria vines. It was full of vitality. There was a clear pond in the temple. The green lotus was beautiful, the white lotus was flawless, and the weeping willows were green. In the shade, there were cicadas and yellows chirping. The trees here were like makeup, and there were exotic flowers everywhere. The scenery was quiet and beautiful, making people forget about their worries. Wang Yingfang invited Zhang Yan to the temple. The two sat down and smiled. "What do you think of my place?" Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "A paradise, nothing more than that." He wasn't flattering her. Xianling Island was built by Tao Zhenren. Although it was decorated well, it lacked the beauty of nature. It was obvious that Wang Yingfang's temple was decorated with care. Wang Yingfang smiled after receiving Zhang Yan's praise. The two chatted for a while, then she summoned her disciples to the temple. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that there were 12 disciples. Most of them were demonic cultivators. Their cultivations were not uniform. Most of them were in the clear Qi realm, and only 2 were in the mystic light realm. Among them, there were 3 or 4 who hadn't transformed for a long time. Their cultivations were still low, and there were still scales and feathers behind their ears. It was obvious that they hadn't been taught any Xian techniques. Thus, their demonic aura was still present. It was obvious that they were either from the water race or birds. After demonic cultivators transformed, they all liked to hide their origins. Unless it was a life and death battle, no one would want to show their true form. Zhang Yan glanced at Wang Yingfang. Hearing Guolai praise his junior sister's deep roots, he couldn't help but wonder what this beautiful nun's original form was. Wang Yingfang waved her horsetail whisk and shouted at the disciples, "Your uncle Master Zhang is a direct disciple of Qinsong School. He comes from a large Xianmen sect. Come and greet him." Some of these disciples were taken in by her in the Donghua continent, and some were from the Donghai. Most of them had shallow roots and admired the Xianmen disciples. Hearing that Zhang Yan came from Qinsong School, they all came to greet him and looked at him curiously. Zhang Yan smiled and raised his hand. He said politely, "Martial nephews, no need to be so polite. I didn't know fellow Taoist Wang has so many disciples." Wang Yingfang smiled and shook her head. She sighed. "In Qinsong Yu sect, she doesn't have any disciples." "Qinsong. Disciple Wang has no disciples. I Don Yu disciple Qinsong. Sect brother Qinsong has never had before. But I has of sect. Clan Yu sect, mountain. Qi, sect master, Yao of sect, of temple, 1, 7. Sect master of E sect, clan, and 1 Yu Yi, mountain, Wang sect, Wang. Sect of sect. When she spoke up to hear, she gestured with her hand to call over a young woman that wore yellow clothes and had bright eyes and white teeth. She said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you've met my martial nephew Fu, so take a look at this disciple of mine. How about you?" After looking at her, Zhang Yan suddenly pointed with his finger. A beam of light shot into the girl's eyes. The disciples below all changed color and cried out in surprise. But this girl's face was calm. Her eyes were clear, and she didn't look flustered at all. After looking for a while, Zhang Yan suddenly pointed out with his finger, and a ray of light shot straight into the young woman's eyes. All the disciples below were astounded and exclaimed in shock, but only the young woman's face remained calm, her eyes were clear, and she didn't reveal the slightest trace of panic. Zhang Yan retracted his sword aura midway and nodded his head in praise. "Excellent aptitude, a tenacious temperament and a good foundation. Although it has not been long since you opened your meridians, if you train well, you will have great achievements in the future." His praise was sincere. It carried more weight than the polite words from before. Wang Yingfang was happy when she heard it. She said to the girl, Thanks sect Master Zhang for his praise." The girl was smart and obedient. She knew what Zhang Yan meant. She blinked her beautiful eyes and smiled sweetly. "Wulon, greets sect Master Zhang." She raised her head and looked at Zhang Yan with her beautiful eyes. Zhang Yan saw her act like this. He laughed in his heart. I was wondering what Wang Daoist was trying to do. I thought she wanted to show off her disciple. So she's asking me for a greeting gift. I'm not afraid of giving away some benefits. I'm just afraid you won't be able to accept it. He smiled and took out an item from his sleeve. It was the Life Marrow Great Virtue Ointment. He had the mind comprehending mystic art. If he was injured, he only needed to circulate his mystic art and he would be able to recover in an instant. Therefore, this item was not very useful to him. He could use it as a favor. He shook his hand and threw a jade bottle to Lun. It's my first time meeting Martial Niece. Sect Master Zhang doesn't have anything good. This item has some effect. I'll give it to you. He didn't favor one over the other. He took out another 11 packets of medicine from his sleeve and gave them out. Wulan raised her wrist and carefully received it. She didn't even look at what it was. She bowed and said, Thanks, Sect Master Zhang. The disciples below also took the elixir, but after turning it over and over in their hands, they couldn't recognize what it was. One of the disciples couldn't help but open it secretly. He picked it up and looked at it. He smelled it and saw a black lump. He didn't know what it was. It smelled like something burnt. He couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He thought that Zhang Yan gave them something rotten to deal with them. However, Wang Yingfang was sitting on the spot. He naturally wouldn't mock her in public. He couldn't help but despise her in his heart. Wang Yingfang didn't care at first. However, after smelling the smell, she couldn't help but be moved. She suddenly stood up and took a packet of demon medicine. She looked at it and sighed. Friend, the gift is too much. Hearing her say that, the disciples became suspicious. Could it really be some kind of treasure? Some clever disciples quickly kept the jade bottle. They were afraid that the thick-skinned disciples would take it. Back then, in order to cultivate Wang Yingfang and the other two disciples, Tao Zhenren put in a lot of effort. He traveled all over the Donghua continent to find countless treasures to help them condense their cores and achieve Tao. He himself wasted hundreds of years of cultivation. Like teacher, like disciple, Wang Yingfang also spared no effort for her disciples. However, she ran around all these years and really didn't have anything good in her hands. Even if she had some wealth, it had long been used up. Wang Yingfang had heard from Guolai that Zhang Yan even had the Hanya Shenzhen grass, this kind of rare thing, on him, so he must be very wealthy. As soon as she saw him, she wanted to do him a favor and at the same time help her disciples gain some benefits. However, Zhang Yan's gift was a bit too much. The body of a cultivator was like a treasured raft for achieving Tao. It couldn't be damaged at all. With this medicine, their chances of achieving Tao would increase. These disciples were all receiving benefits from Zhang Yan, but she would have to bear the consequences of this favor in the future. If Zhang Yan was just a normal cultivator, it would be fine. However, he was a direct disciple of Qinsong School. According to Guolai, he had his own grotto heaven. Although he was only at the mystic light realm right now, his cultivation might be above hers in 100 years. There was no place for him to ask for help from her, so how was she supposed to return this favor? However, since this item was in her hands, there was no reason to return it. Wang Yingfang saw that Zhang Yan was smiling faintly. It was obvious that he was doing this on purpose. She felt bitter in her heart and sighed. She thought to herself, never mind. Eldest senior brother wants to ask for a celestial palace decree for this fellow Taoist Zhang, but master's attitude is unclear and hasn't said anything yet. If eldest senior brother can't get it, then even if master punishes me, I will think of a way to help this fellow Taoist Zhang and return this favor as soon as possible. While she was thinking with a frown, Zhang Yan smiled and said, fellow Taoist doesn't need to feel troubled. I have something that I need fellow Taoists help with. Wang Yingfang was not shocked but happy. She said, may I ask what fellow Taoist needs? Zhang Yan smiled lightly. I see that fellow Taoist has a few disciples who have just opened their meridians. I wonder if there is a good jade elixir essence pond in the cave? Wang Yingfang was surprised. Could it be that fellow Taoist has a nephew that you need to use? Zhang Yan nodded. That's right. On that big ship of mine, there is a junior of a master who asked me to look after her. She is also a female cultivator. Now that her cultivation has reached perfection and is about to open her meridians, she wishes to ask for a suitable essence pond. Wang Yingfang didn't even think and agreed almost immediately. She said, "In my Swan Goose Palace, there are 3 first-class essence ponds. If fellow Taoist doesn't mind, you can choose any one of them to use." Zhang Yan raised his hands and cupped them. He said with a smile, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. With this, one of my worries has been resolved." Wang Yingfang didn't dare to be careless. She hurriedly bowed and returned the greeting. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It turned out that this fellow Taoist Zhang already had a plan. She had been anxious for nothing. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but glare at him. This glare revealed some flirtatious colors. However, Zhang Yan acted as if he didn't see it. At this moment, a young girl walked in and reported, "Master, there is a person outside. He claims to be a subordinate of Demon King Xian Tong. He was ordered to deliver an item to Uncle Master Zhang as an apology." Wang Yingfang's face revealed a serious expression. This Demon King Xian Tong usually didn't show himself, but he was one of the demon kings that she couldn't see through. When she heard that he and Zhang Yan had a disagreement, she wanted to help resolve it. However, she didn't know what this demon king was up to. After thinking for a while, she said, "Summon this person to the palace." The person who walked into the palace was a delicate boy. His head was lowered and he held a jade plate in his hand. On top of it, there was a brocade box. With Zhang Yan's eyesight, he could naturally see that this brocade box didn't have any spiritual qi. He also didn't know what the demon king was up to. He waved his hand and took the brocade box over. When he opened the lid, he saw a head placed neatly in it. He could vaguely see the flirtatious charm of the person when she was alive. He immediately recognized that it was Consort Jade. Without any change in his expression, he raised his head and asked the boy, "When you left, did Demon King Xian Tong say anything?" The boy said crisply, "My master said that Consort Jade was blinded by greed and offended you. She asked for it and hoped that you wouldn't blame her." Zhang Yan thought for a while and thought to himself, "What a good Demon King Xian Tong." He closed the box and smiled at the boy, "Go back and tell your Demon King that I've accepted this item. I also know his intention. If I'm free in the future, I'll pay him a visit." Although the boy was young, he was unusually calm. He bowed deeply to Zhang Yan and bowed to Wang Yingfang. When he was about to leave, a golden talisman flew into the palace. Wang Yingfang was stunned. She reached out and took it. When she opened her fingers, her expression turned serious and she stood up. She looked at Zhang Yan with a complicated gaze and said, "My master invites you to Xianling Palace. Target equals _blank." Chapter 198. Deceiving the heavens and crossing the sea. Since it was Tao Zhenren's invitation, Zhang Yan naturally would not delay. Wang Yingfang personally sent him out of the temple. After the two of them said their goodbyes, Zhang Yan rode on the conveyance light and headed towards the highest peak of Mysterious Spirit Island. On the peak, there was a temple with a golden roof and bronze pillars. It was half hidden in the clouds. Looking at it from the bottom of the mountain, it was dazzling with colorful lights and auspicious mist, making it look like a dream. Zhang Yan flew all the way up the cliff. He saw green vines climbing the walls, old apes climbing the branches, birds flying across the sky from time to time, and cranes chirping. Not long after, he suddenly felt a pressure coming towards him, as if it wanted to press him down. He quickly steadied the conveyance light. However, the higher he went, the heavier the pressure became. In the end, it was as if a 1,000-kilogram boulder was hanging on his body. Zhang Yan had just received Wang Yingfang's guidance, so he knew that the path from here to here was correct. However, he did not hear from her that there would be such an encounter. He did not know whether she deliberately leaked it or she did not know about it. However, the pressure was very similar to the cultivator's earth element qi, so it was as heavy as 1,000 caddies. It was not impossible for him to solve it. He immediately shouted and took out the sword pill. He used the sword escape technique and tore through the air all the way to the top of the mountain. When he reached the top of the cliff, he kept the conveyance light, and his sleeves fluttered as he descended. However, before he landed on the ground, the scenery in front of him suddenly changed. It was as if a curtain had fallen, and the sky and the ground were vast and misty. He could not tell the distance between him and the ground. Zhang Yan had been in battle for a long time, and he instantly understood in his heart that he'd surely stepped into a restriction formation. However, since it was Tao Jinren who invited him here, he would definitely not let him get lost in it. Hence, his expression did not change, and he did not make any movements. He just waited patiently. Sure enough, a dazzling golden bridge flew out in no time and stopped beneath his feet. He smiled, waved his sleeves, and took a step forward. He arrived at the other end of the golden bridge in just a few dozen steps. There were 2 large stone blocks on the left and right, and on each of them was a green lotus and jasper dish. 2 brightly colored parrots with green eyes and red beaks stood on top of them. The parrot on the left said, "Guest, please turn left." The parrot on the right said, "Guest, please turn right." Zhang Yan stopped and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, why did one say left and the other say right?" The parrot on the left said, "One of us only speaks the truth." The parrot on the right said, "One only tells lies." Zhang Yan understood that this was a roadblock that Tao Jinren had purposely set up to test him. If it was anyone else here, they would definitely be in a dilemma, not knowing where to go. However, he sneered and actually turned around without any hesitation. However, after he stepped across the bridge, he did not return to the original boundary. Instead, the gray smoke parted, and he unknowingly stepped into an empty valley. Here, the mountain rain was hazy, and the sky was blue. A winding mountain path appeared in front of him, surrounded by green pines and cypresses, and moss covered the stone steps. He smiled, tidied up his robe, and walked up the steps. Not long after, he reached the top of the slope. He looked up and saw a waterfall falling from a height of several dozen feet. It crashed down with great momentum, stirring up countless ice pearls and jade drops. Beside the clear pond, there was a beautiful young Taoist with eyes like bright stars sitting on a high stone. He held a jade ruyi in his hand, and there was a majestic blue luan beside his knee. 2 boys stood by his side. When they saw Zhang Yan coming in, they said lightly, "Since you have come, why are you in a hurry to leave?" Zhang Yan stepped forward, cupped his hands, and said calmly, "I am not leaving, I am here to see Tao Jinren." Tao Jinren shifted his gaze, stared at his face, and said in a deep voice, "Since you have come to see me, why did you turn back halfway?" Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and said casually, "If Jinren wants to see me, I can walk to Jinren. If Jinren does not want to see me, I will not be able to see Jinren no matter how hard I try." Tao Jinren heard this, and suddenly laughed loudly, making a rumbling sound in the valley, and said, "Seeing the true heart, and pointing to the true meaning, it is rare, rare." He pointed the jade ruyi in his hand to a green stone beside him, and said with a smile, "Fellow Zhang, please sit down and talk." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said seriously, "Then please forgive me for my rudeness." He walked a few steps forward, and sat down on the green stone beside him without any reservations. Tao Jinren changed his previous coldness, and said with a pleasant expression, "Fellow Zhang, Gualai told me about your purpose of coming here, please give me the 2 seals." A boy beside him walked down from the platform. Zhang Yan came to Mysterious Spirit Island for this matter, and he was already prepared. He immediately handed over the 2 seals that imprisoned Lu Junbai and Monster Queen Junyue. Tao Jinren took the seals from the boy, took a glance at them, and wiped his hand, and a ray of light flashed past. Then, without any movement from him, the 2 seals flew down, and he said, "In 7 days, the seals will be dissolved." Zhang Yan quickly caught the 2 seals, and stood up to express his gratitude. "Thank you for your help, spiritual master." Tao Jinren smiled, "Fellow Taoist, don't thank me yet, please sit down first. I also have a matter that I need your help with, and after listening to me, you can decide for yourself whether you are willing or not." Zhang Yan pondered for a while, and then sat down again. Tao Jinren said calmly, "Fellow Taoist must know that in the Eastern Sea, there will be an immortal palace appearing in the near future." Zhang Yan said cautiously, "I have also heard some rumors, but it is difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies." It is said that once the immortal palace appears, 48 seals will appear. If you are fated, you will be able to obtain one, and enter the immortal palace. Tao Zhenren nodded and laughed. This is true, but fellow Taoist may not know, but in fact, I have been living in this immortal palace for more than 100 years. Zhang Yan was surprised to hear this, and said in surprise, in that case, the immortal palace that is about to appear in the sea is already owned by spiritual master? Tao Zhenren chuckled and shook his head, yes and no. Before me, there was another master of this immortal palace, and now I don't know where he is, but he left a lot of restrictions. Although I can enter this place, to completely refine this immortal palace, it will take more than 100 years of uninterrupted hard work, and I can't even get out in a flash. It is like being trapped in a cage. Zhang Yan glanced at Tao Zhenren, and saw that the latter was sitting there peacefully, but did not look like he couldn't get out at all. Tao Zhenren smiled faintly and said, fellow Taoist, you don't have to be confused. Right now, I am not meeting you with my physical body, but with my Yuanying Dharma body. My real body is still being refined in the immortal palace. As long as I wait until January next year, I will be able to completely refine this palace, and it will become the foundation of my clear feather sect. Hearing this, Zhang Yan was also surprised. This Tao Zhenren's Yuanying was actually the same as a living person's, and it was obvious that his cultivation had already reached an extremely high level. He had also seen Xiao Mu's Yuanying, but it could not be compared to Tao Zhenren at all. Tao Zhenren's grace and bearing were extraordinary, and he sat there and spoke calmly, making people feel like they were bathing in a spring breeze. He continued, this immortal palace is called the Violet Jade Langhan Immortal Palace, and it is formed by gathering 49 deep pavilions and jade buildings. Every palace has its own talisman, and I only hold the main palace's decree, but if I sense that the main palace is about to change hands, the other 48 side palaces will fly out decrees. I will look for another master. Zhang Yan frowned and said, perfected one has worked hard for 100 years. If that's the case, aren't we giving it away to someone else? Tao Zhenren smiled and said, not so. Although the side palaces seem to be the same as the main palace, they are not as useful as the main palace, so it is not a big deal even if someone takes them away. He paused for a while, then slowed down his tone and said, what I am worried about is that at the final moment of refining the immortal palace, my real body cannot move. In the past, I have an old acquaintance who is an elder of the South Flower sect, and he knows a little about the secret of this palace. Therefore, once this palace appears, he will definitely come to seek revenge and find an opportunity to snatch the main palace. By then, the various forces in the Eastern Sea, such as the Chongyue True Temple and the Wudong Spiritual Hall, will definitely hear the news and come to snatch it. Therefore, I need someone to hold the main palace's decree and enter my palace so that no one can tell where I am, so as to deceive everyone and ensure that the main palace is not lost. If we can survive this calamity, my clear feather sect will be able to successfully establish a sect and stand on the sea. Zhang Yan thought to himself, so Tao Zhen already had a plan. He used the pretense as the truth and gathered all the demon kings here in the name of establishing a sect. Not only could he deceive others and confuse them, he could also use these people to fight against the enemy together. It's killing two birds with one stone. But from what he said, he obviously wants me to be the person to hold the decree. Tao Zhenren looked at him and said, fellow Taoist is smart, so you must know what I mean. Let me ask you, are you willing to lend me a hand? Zhang Yan had doubts in his heart, so he asked, although this is not easy, there are many talents under perfected one, so why did you choose me? Tao Zhenren smiled and said, I was originally the imperial official of the talisman, but he was hit by the Bai Li godly wind. Now, I can only use a miraculous pill to protect his soul, but he probably won't be able to wake up when the time comes. My 4 disciples are too conspicuous, and among the 3rd-generation disciples, I don't have anyone suitable by my side, so I have no choice but to do this. Furthermore, there is an advantage to choosing you. You are not a member of my clear feather sect, so if you hold my decree and occupy a palace, no one will be suspicious. Zhang Yan nodded. What he said was not without reason. No one would have thought that Tao Xinren would entrust his life to an outsider. Moreover, he was a disciple of Qinsong school, so the elder of South China sect might not be able to put down his pride and bully him. Tao Xinren looked at him and smiled. This cannot be forced. It all depends on fellow Taoist sincerity. If you are unwilling, I won't stop fellow Taoist at all. You just need to swear that you won't reveal this matter, and you can leave. However, if fellow Taoist agrees, my Clear Feather sect can hire you as a guest elder, and you can learn any Tao technique in our sect. Apart from that, if you have any requests in the future, I can promise you 3 things. Hearing this, Zhang Yan was moved. The Tao techniques of Clear Feather sect were exquisite, but he had his own teachings in Qinsong school, so he did not care too much about them. However, if he could get Tao Xinren, the Yuanying perfected one, to promise him 3 things, it would be worth it. This risk was worth it. However, even now, he was not in a hurry to agree. Instead, he said, Perfected One, Junior is only at the mystic light realm. Putting aside the elder of South China sect, even the demon kings in the East Ocean might not be able to stop them. How can I help Perfected One? Tao Xinren laughed brightly. I was wondering what it was. So it is this. Fellow Taoist, don't worry. Since I asked you to help me, I naturally have a way to help you. He reached into his sleeve and took out a golden core that was the size of a goose egg. He said, I can teach you a secret technique that will allow you to control this golden core for 6 hours. I know that fellow Taoist is a sword cultivator, and with the help of this golden core, you can even block a core formation cultivator. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he felt that this was a good thing. He did not hesitate anymore and said, Tao Xinren, I will agree to this. Target equals _blank. Chapter 199. The 3 spiritual masters have a discussion. Zhang Yan descended from the peak and went straight to the Dragon Country ship. After he agreed to the Immortal Palace, Tao Xinren immediately taught him a technique and gave him the golden core. This method of controlling other people's golden cores was quite amazing. Tao Xinren had only learned it after entering the Purple Jade Immortal Palace, and there was no other way to learn it. He didn't know who this golden core came from, and even with Zhang Yan's current cultivation, he couldn't tell what grade the golden core was originally. However, Tao Xinren also warned him that although this method was extraordinary, it could only be used 3 times, and each time it was only for 2 to 4 hours. It could only be used at critical moments, and he couldn't rely on it. Therefore, Zhang Yan didn't expect to use this method to pass the test. What he really relied on were the 2 talismans in his hands that hadn't been unsealed yet. After 7 days, Lu Junbai and Monster Queen Junyue would break out of the seal and stay to help him. He calculated the time. Lu Mainyang should have returned by then. At that time, there would be 3 core formation cultivators by his side, and with the help of this golden core, as long as it wasn't spiritual master Yuanying attacking, it would be enough to protect the main palace. The only worry was that there were many forces on the sea trying to snatch the decree, but Tao Xinren was the only one on his side. It was unknown how many Yuanying spiritual masters the other side had. Could Tao Xinren resist? He thought that Tao Xinren must have some backup plan, but it was just inconvenient for him to tell him. He flew all the way, and before long, he arrived at the sea and landed on the Dragon Country ship that was anchored there. Zhang Pan recognized him and came out to greet him happily, saying, Master, you're back. Zhang Yan stood on the deck with one hand behind his back and said in a deep voice, Zhang Pan, go and summon Gu Chuer. Zhang Pan nodded and returned to the cabin. Not long after, Gu Chuer walked out and stood timidly in front of him. Zhang Yan took a closer look at her and saw that she was full of vigor, her eyes were filled with light, and her skin was as smooth as white jade. He nodded and said, You've improved quite a bit. As expected, you're about to reach that stage. Gu Chuer, I want to take you to a jade elixir flower pond to open your immortal meridians. If we succeed, you can go wherever you want to go in the future. It's no longer my business. Gu Chuer was pleasantly surprised, but she was also a little confused. She was only 13 or 14 years old. When she was brought here by Zhang Yan, she was a little anxious at first, But then she saw that Zhang Yan didn't care about her, only occasionally checking on her progress. Thus, he was relieved. Every day that jade slip would nourish her blood vessels and adjust her breathing, her cultivation would get deeper day by day. She herself could also feel that this incantation was very brilliant. It was many times better than what she learned when she was a registered disciple in Chongyu Zhenguan. She grew up in the Chongyu True Temple. Her aptitude was not good, and in the future, she could only be a maidservant of a true disciple. Now that she had obtained this technique, there was hope for her to pry into the Tao. Now that Zhang Yan was actually going to take her to open her meridians, even if he had ulterior motives, she would accept it. Thus, she mustered up her courage and said sincerely, "Thank you, Taoist. Chu is willing to serve Taoist by your side, serving tea and water, cleaning the cave, trimming the flowers, washing clothes, and folding blankets. Chu can do anything." Zhang Yan glanced at her. Although Zhang Pan was loyal, he had only taken human form for a short period of time. His intelligence was just starting to develop, so his brain wasn't too bright and he didn't do things very well. If he had such an obedient maidservant by his side, it wouldn't be too bad. However, after thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. This girl was a disciple he took in as a gift for Pu Yuzi, and her technique was extremely suitable for Bu Tian Pavilion. In the future, she would definitely be someone with great accomplishments, so why should he cut off her path? He smiled and said, "Little Miss Gu, there is no need to be like this. You have a great opportunity, so how can you be a servant for me? You should focus on your cultivation. In the future, when you reach the immortal clouds, you might be able to find a place for yourself." Gu Chu nodded her head, not really understanding. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Come with me." Gu Chu took 2 steps forward, and he released the mysterious light. A ball of blue light wrapped around her, and they flew towards the Swan Goose Temple. At this moment, tens of thousands of miles away from mysterious Spirit Mountain, under the bright moon, a 10-zhang-wide chessboard was suspended in the night sky. On it sat 2 Taoists surrounded by clear energy. On the north side sat a Daoran. He had a long beard, a turtle's back, crane's hair, and a fishtail crown on his head. He wore a 7-star battle robe, and there was a ferocious black tiger crouching under his feet. He was currently meditating with his eyes closed. Sitting in front of him was a young Taoist. His face was like jade, and he wore a 9-sun scarf on his head. His waist was tied with a silk sash, and his sleeves were fluttering in the wind. His expression had a sense of pride and arrogance. The two seemed to have been sitting there for a long time. The young Taoist was a little impatient and said, "Senior Chiu, this Yi Feng Bo is so arrogant. Why did he make us wait for so long?" Doran's eyelids slightly opened, and he said in a deep voice, "Junior Lin, don't be impatient. I heard that Elder Yi returned to the sect to borrow a treasure. I'm afraid there will be some twists and turns, so it is normal for him to be a little late." The young Taoist snorted and said, "If he can't borrow it, I will teach him a lesson." Just as he finished speaking, there was a laughter that pierced through the clouds and split the sky. "Taoist Lin, you have such a temper." Along with this voice, a Taoist with a long beard and a green face with his hair tied into a bun came over on the clouds. In the blink of an eye, he arrived on the chessboard and said, "I've made the 2 Taoists wait for a long time, my apologies." The 2 people on the chessboard also stood up to return the greeting. Old Taoist Chiu saw a rather inconspicuous green-skinned calabash tied to his waist and said, "Fellow Taoist Yi, could this be?" Taoist Yi patted the calabash and laughed. "That's right, this is the 9 Faults Sun Spear calabash that I asked senior brother for." Chiu Doran's eyelids twitched and he said, "It's this treasure?" Taoist Yi said, "That Tao Zhenhong's mana is amazing. He's only 1 step away from the Grotto Heaven realm, and he has the help of the 6-shelled black tortoise. Without this treasure, how can the 3 of us do anything to him?" The young Taoist sneered and said, "Of course, senior brother Tao is from our Nanhua sect. How can he be compared to ordinary people?" Taoist Yi heard the sarcasm in his words and glanced at him, but he smiled and did not seem angry at all. Taoist Chiu frowned and said unhappily, "Junior brother Lin, Tao Zhenhong's name has long been erased from the ancestral hall, and he also injured many of our disciples. How can you still call him senior brother? Don't say that again. Taoist Lin laughed and said, Senior brother, don't say that. Although Tao Zhenhong broke out of the sect all these years, have you seen him really being ruthless? If he didn't intentionally let senior brother Wei go last time, how could senior brother Wei return alive? Taoist Chiu knew his junior brother's temper and could not do anything to him, so he shook his head slightly and did not want to argue with him. Moreover, he was in front of Taihao School's Yifengbua, and he did not want others to laugh at him for no reason. Yifengbua smiled and looked around, saying, Tao Zhenhong is about to open his sect. Why don't I see fellow Taoist Xiao here? Taoist Chiu shook his head and said, We lost track of him long ago. Even the eagles and pigeons couldn't find him. It was as if he disappeared into thin air. Yifengbua was surprised and said, Could he have returned to Qinsong school? Taoist Lin sneered and said, That's hard to say. Xiao clan is a Xianmen clan. They are not the same as us. Yifengbua and Taoist Chiu did not refute. They were not from Xianmen clans. If it was not for the conspiracy against Tao Zhenhong, they did not want to have anything to do with this person. Yifengbua laughed and patted the gourd on his waist, saying, Even if he doesn't come, we still have to look at his face. With this Dharma treasure of mine, even without him, the three of us can definitely take down Tao Zhenhong. Chiu Daoren stroked his beard and said, Tao Zhenhong should be fine with the three of us dealing with him, but his disciples like Zhao Zhengqing, Wang Yingfang, and Yang Lin are all core formation cultivators. Even the most useless Gualai has condensed a small golden core. I don't know how he taught them, but our disciples are far inferior. Taoist Lin shook his head and said, Fortunately, Tao Zhenhong is very talented. If it wasn't for these disciples, he would have already become the Taoist master of Dong Tian. Chiu Daoren said in a deep voice, We need to think of a safer way. His disciple Chiu Ju and Yifengbua's disciple Chu Jiu were only mystic light realm cultivators. If they fought, they could only stall Tao Zhenhong, but they would not be able to deal with his disciples. Originally, with Xiao Mu here, they didn't need to think about this at all, but now that he was nowhere to be found, they were in a bit of a dilemma. Yifengbua laughed and said, Fellow Taoists don't need to worry. I went to the Wudong Spirit Hall once and have already convinced Taoist Master Pei. He is willing to bring disciples to help us. Wudong Spirit Hall? Chiu Daoren frowned. Taoist Lin laughed coldly and said, Fellow Taoist Yi is so generous. The Wudong Spirit Hall was a loose sect created by a group of wandering cultivators with high cultivation levels, so cultivators from large Xian sects looked down on them. They came here to deal with Tao Zhenhong and also for the Purple Jade Langhan Celestial Palace. They had already seen this Celestial Palace as something in the bag, but now that Yifengbua had asked the people from the Wudong Spirit Hall to help, they were bound to split the Celestial Palace, so the two of them were not happy. Yifengbua saw their ugly expressions and hurriedly said, Fellow Taoists, please listen to me. This time, when the Celestial Palace appeared, Tao Zhenhong invited a few monster kings of the Eastern Sea to attend the ceremony. He might use his guts to fight against us. Also, don't forget that there is still the Chongyue True Temple above the Eastern Sea. They might be watching us from behind and waiting to reap the benefits, so we have to be on guard. Chiu Daoren thought carefully and nodded. Fellow Taoist Yi is right. Compared to the Chongyue True Temple, although the people in the Wudong Spirit Hall are wandering cultivators, they are quite trustworthy and won't stab us in the back. Taoist Lin said coldly, I have long disliked the actions of the Chongyue True Temple. If there is a chance this time, I will definitely teach them a lesson. Yifengbua smiled and said, Speaking of which, I heard a piece of good news. Su and Su Daoren of the Chongyue True Temple failed to break through and died. We got rid of a big enemy. Chiu Daoren paused for a moment before saying slowly, Su Daoren's lifespan is almost up. If he doesn't try, he will die for sure. I wonder who did he leave the murderous Yin blade with? Yifengbua said, I heard that he left it with a mystic light realm disciple. Taoist Lin said in disdain, a mystic light realm cultivator can only use 10 to 20% of the blade's power. What a waste. However, old Taoist Chiu shook his head and said, Even so, with the ferocious might of this saber, I'm afraid no one in our sect can defeat him. We need to warn them that if they encounter this person, they should retreat, lest they lose their lives in vain. Target equals _blank. Chapter 200. In a quiet room of the Swan Goose Temple, Zhang Yan sat on a futon and stared at a talisman floating in front of him. He exhaled a mouthful of spiritual qi, and the talisman trembled slightly and emitted a candlelight. When the light became brighter, he reached out and grabbed the ball of white light from his sleeve. 9VK start / he had seen this thing before. It was a ball of essence formed by the qi of the 5 metals in the veins of the earth. He did not know who had refined it into a small piece of meteoric iron. This method seemed to be used to make a good sword pill. If it was tempered repeatedly with the true fire and absorbed the spiritual qi of the sun and moon on a high platform every day, it might be possible to make a good sword pill after thousands of years. However, Zhang Yan had the sword pill, so he did not need it. Now that he took it out, he wanted to make a sword talisman of the fighting gate, recorded in the Talisman Pouch book. Since he wanted to protect the main residence of the Immortal Palace for Tao Jinren, it was better to prepare one more method. This sword talisman was very powerful, but because it had lost the incantation of the sect of alchemy, it could only be used once. It was a life-saving talisman in times of crisis. In the past 7 days, he had spent almost everything. This talisman had gathered more than 10,000 spiritual shells spiritual qi. If it was not for the fact that he had reached his limit, he would not stop even if he had to give up all the spiritual shells. He even poured the spiritual qi from the 4 symbols God-killing formation into the talisman. He had used up a lot of this spiritual qi in the river Styx, and the remaining spiritual qi was not enough for refining medicine and weapons. He simply refined all of it into this sword talisman. However, the spiritual qi was enough, but it was still lacking a little qi of the 5 metals. He could use this spiritual qi to make up for it. The spiritual qi seemed to know that a disaster was coming, and it struggled desperately in Zhang Yan's hand. It made a hissing sound and shot out sharp qi, cutting the furniture in the quiet room one after another. Zhang Yan sneered, and a beam of light shot out from his mouth, trapping the soul. Then he activated his inner breath, and spat out the golden light and raging fire on it. About 4 hours later, he finally dispersed the 5 metal qi. Then he shouted and slapped the talisman. A whistling sound rang out in the quiet room. The golden talisman pierced through the roof tiles and shot up into the sky. Zhang Yan also leaped straight into the clouds. He saw the talisman hovering in midair, his whole body emitting a dense sword aura, and his eyes were cold. He smiled faintly and cast a spell. The talisman turned into a golden light and circled around him before returning into his sleeve. He was not in a hurry to return to the temple and sat cross-legged on the cloud. The wind from the sea made his clothes flutter noisily. He gazed into the distance and saw the changing clouds on the horizon, the fog blurred, the dark clouds pressing down on the sea as if they were about to collapse. It was as if the heaven and earth were boundless and the wind and clouds were gathering. The auspicious cloud that emerged from the bottom of the sea grew brighter and brighter. It was obvious that the immortal abode would be born soon. Although he could see the brilliance of the immortal abode, the immortal palace was actually erratic and had no fixed location. Other than Tao Jinren, no one knew where it was hiding. At this moment, the sun was setting in the west, and the sky was dark and gloomy, but he was still sitting on the cloud, as if he was waiting for something. When the hour of the high arrived, the 2 talismans he originally placed on the jade couch suddenly shook and rushed out of the dome. 2 streaks of multicolored light flew out and illuminated the entire night sky. Amidst the smoke, a colorful pheasant gave a faint cry. The smoke dispersed, revealing a graceful figure. A woman in red gracefully came over. She smiled and bowed to Zhang Yan, saying softly, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for helping me escape from the confinement." With a loud laugh, Lu Junbai, who had restored his old appearance, also walked over and cupped his hands in gratitude. "It's all thanks to fellow Taoists' help to get through this disaster." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and returned the greeting. "Fellow Taoists, please follow me into the temple for a chat. I have another important matter to discuss with you." The night sky was low and the bright moon was in the sky. A mysterious snake's 9 orifices great sea boat was anchored on the sea. The waves below were tumbling, but the boat was flashing with green aura rainbows, as if there was an intense battle going on. Chiu-ju was scurrying around on the conveyance light. He was forced into a difficult situation by a flying needle that was as thin as a cow's hair. Seeing that he couldn't dodge it no matter what, he had to say, "Senior Marshal Brother Tsing, I admit defeat, I admit defeat." The flying formation was suddenly taken away by someone. The white aura on the opposite side dissipated, and a young Taoist walked out. He was wrapped in a black robe, and his feet were on cloud shoes. He held a 3-feet-long Ganoderma in his hand, and the crown was 10 feet wide, like a green umbrella. He smiled faintly and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Chiu, you're too humble. Your Nanhua sect is good at controlling spiritual birds and strange beasts. If it wasn't for your flower falcon being taken away by Shinmingu, and you couldn't use 70% of your original Taoist techniques, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to defeat you so easily." Chiu-ju originally had a sunken nose and thick lips, and his forehead was like a tree wart. His appearance was weird, and now that he heard these words, he felt like his sore point was poked, and his expression turned even uglier. That day when he went against Shinmingu, he couldn't take it anymore and made a bet with him. In the end, he was defeated, and even lost his spiritual bird. Although the other party was covering for him on the surface, he was secretly mocking his Nanhua sect for not having the help of a spiritual beast. However, he wasn't good with words, so he just moved his lips and couldn't make a sound. Zhu Jiao, who was standing at the side and watching the battle, saw that the atmosphere was a little stiff, so he walked over with a smile. He patted Chiu-ju's shoulder and sighed, "Senior Marshal Brother Chiu, don't mind him. My senior martial brother Tsing Han has been in Taoism for 135 years and has met countless fellow Taoists. His foundation is very solid, and now he's only one step away from core formation. This star-in ray needle has been practiced to perfection, and his cultivation is far above mine. It's not wrong for you to lose." Chiu-ju was silent for a moment, then he cupped his hands and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Tsing is brilliant. I'm not as good as you." Tsing Han smiled proudly, then looked to the side and saw a girl in a white dress standing there quietly, like a pure white lotus. He asked, "Sister Xen, you are a disciple of the Yuan Yang martial school. Why don't you tell me if there are any flaws in my acupuncture technique? Can it win against Shinmingu?" This woman was called Xen Chanjin, and she was a true disciple of Yuan Yang sword sect. That day, she sensed the location of the 7 ultimate pillars, so she came all the way to the East Sea. She and Tsing Han were old acquaintances, so they walked together. Tsing Han asked this question with the intention of showing off, hoping to hear some good words, but she thought about it seriously and said, "Although I don't know Shinmingu, according to what Senior Marshal Brother Chiu and Senior Marshal Brother Chu said, with Senior Marshal Brother Tsing's ability, he still had some chance of winning, but now he's more likely to lose." Tsing Han heard this and felt a little uncomfortable. He frowned and said, "Why? I'd like to hear Junior Marshal Sister's opinion." Xen Chanjin said calmly, "Shinmingu's yin-yang flying dagger can be used at close range, and it's extremely fierce. But it has a flaw, and that is, it's not easy to fly during a fight. If you suddenly meet, the one who makes the first move will have some advantage." Tsing Han didn't agree at first, but after hearing this, his face turned serious, and he couldn't help but nod in agreement. He said, "That's reasonable. After my 2 junior martial brothers lost to him, I knew that if I fought him face to face, I wouldn't be able to win even after a day and night. Only by making the first move will I have a chance of winning." "But Junior Marshal Sister Xen, why don't you think I can win?" Xen Chanjin faintly said, "Shinmingu is aware of his own weakness, so he set up a trap and won the flower falcon from Senior Brother Chiu. With the falcon's help, he can advance and retreat at will when facing the enemy. For the time being, he has no weaknesses to look for." Tsing Han was startled, and he also frowned in deep thought. Although he thought highly of himself, he wasn't a shallow person who wouldn't listen to good advice, so he immediately reevaluated this opponent in his heart. Xen Chanjin's jade-like fingers lightly stroked the sword at her waist, and said, If this Shen Minggu isn't Senior Marshal Brother Tseng's opponent, I would also want to fight with him. Tseng Han recovered from his thoughts and said with a smile, Junior Marshal Sister Exen, don't be disappointed. I heard that the Chong Yuzhen Temple has 2 disciples who are the best. One is Shen Minggu, and the other is Su Kuo. Now that the immortal abode on the sea is about to appear, all forces are gathering, and we also want to go and fight. When that time comes, Junior Marshal Sister won't have to worry about not meeting a good opponent. Chu Jiao coughed and interrupted, Senior Marshal Brother, you and Senior Marshal Sister Exen just arrived here, so you don't know. I heard that Su Kuo fought with Qinsong school disciple Zhang Yan on the sea a few days ago, and was defeated and captured. Now it's unknown whether he's dead or alive. Tseng Han raised his eyebrows and said, Qinsong school disciple? Junior Marshal Brother has seen this person? Chu Jiao nodded and said, I have. That day, I don't know what method he used to kill Chong Yuzhen Temple's elder Beigong Hao. He's really amazing. We happened to be on Chi Feng Island that day, so we met him. Tseng Han smiled coldly and said, I've also fought with a few true disciples of the Yutsong sect, but none of them lived up to their name. Since this person has come to the Eastern Sea, he's most likely here to fight for the Immortal's abode. Master said that the Immortal's abode will appear in 10 days at the latest. If I meet him, I'd like to have a good fight with him. Chu Jiao had fought with Beigong Hao before, and the fact that Zhang Yan was able to kill him showed that he was extremely powerful. Therefore, he hesitated for a moment and said, Senior Marshal Brother, we are only going to deal with Tao Zhenhong's disciples on Master's orders. Let's not complicate the issue, shall we? Tseng Han raised his eyebrows and was about to speak. At this moment, a talisman flew through the air. He caught a glimpse of it from the corner of his eye and immediately flew into the air to grab it. After removing the restriction, he placed it in front of his eyes and couldn't help but feel refreshed. He raised his head and said, Master has already deduced the location of the immortal abode's appearance and has specially sent a talisman to inform us, summoning us to meet him as soon as possible. Hearing this, Qiu Ju, Chu Jiao, and the others all showed excitement in their eyes. If they could get their hands on this purple jade immortal abode, their great Tao would be within reach. Only Xen Chanjin's jade-like expression remained unchanged. Her beautiful eyes pierced through the waves, staring into the distance, and the magic sword beside her was giving off a faint cry. At this moment, in the cabin of the sea boat, Lady Shan and Master Kai sat facing each other, sipping tea. Senior Marshal Sister Kai said enviously, that fellow Taoist Exen must also be interested in fighting for that immortal abode. Sigh, they are all disciples of big sects and have a lot to talk about. At first, they were still polite to us, but when that fellow Taoist Exen came, she ignored us. At this point, her heart was filled with disappointment and jealousy. Lady Shan saw through her thoughts and couldn't help but advise, Senior Marshal Sister, we are Taoists. Before she could finish, Senior Marshal Sister Kai interrupted her impatiently, saying, Stop, stop, stop. Junior Marshal Sister, why do you have to say that you want to be pure and have few desires? I, your Senior Marshal Sister, cultivate Taoism to stay young forever, and it's enough for me to find a suitable Taoist companion to live freely in this world. Don't talk about immortality, your Senior Marshal Sister isn't cut out for that. Lady Shan sighed and said softly, Senior Marshal Sister, cultivating Taoism can't help you live forever. In the end, you're just a pile of dirt. Senior Marshal Sister Kai glared at her, stomped her feet, and said, Junior Marshal Sister, everyone has their own fate. I just want to live a vigorous life, and as long as I have a few hundred years of happiness, I'm willing to die. Target equals, _. Chapter 201. With a clap of thunder, the rainbow ripples reflected the appearance of the Immortal's mansion. The rainbow lights on the sea grew brighter day by day. Many cultivators on Xianling Island could see it clearly and knew that the day of the Immortal's mansion's appearance was approaching. Wang Yingfang sat on the back of a giant goose and gazed into the distance. Her fingers were constantly divining, as if she was divining good fortune. Suddenly, a beautiful girl riding a crane came over and said, Master, Uncle Master Feng is here. He is waiting in the hall. Wang Yingfang replied, okay. She patted the goose's head and pressed the cloud down. She walked slowly into the hall and saw a person standing in the hall. It was a Taoist nun with slender eyes and a colorful cape draped over her shoulders. Her figure was graceful, but there was a layer of haze between her brows. When he saw her, he stood still and said with a sullen face, "Where is my nephew?" Wang Yingfang smiled and cupped her hands. "Junior Marshal Sister Feng, your nephew Feng is fine. He is in my back hall and has been meditating for the past few days. He has become less impetuous. Senior Marshal Sister must have read my letter. Once you and fellow Taoist Zhang have resolved this layer of misunderstanding, I will let him go." Hearing this, the female Taoist nun suddenly became furious. She raised her eyebrows, waved her sleeve and scolded, "Don't say that. Wang Yingfang, before you became Jinren Tao's disciple, I listened to the Tao together with you under Hengshan ancestor. We could be considered close. My nephew is like your nephew. Why are you siding with an outsider now and asking me to come and apologize?" Seeing her harsh words, Wang Yingfang's originally pretty face twisted a little. She was unhappy and frowned. Feng Yao conspired with others to steal fellow Taoist Zhang's magic weapon. If it was someone else, they would have been killed on the spot. It was because he sacrificed the white feather that I refined and escaped to my door that I saved him once. It was only because of our old friendship that I wanted to resolve the conflict between our two families. Why does Senior Marshal Sister Feng say that I am siding with an outsider? The nun sneered and said, "Even so, it is impossible for me to make amends. If you still care about our past friendship, don't interfere in this matter. Let me settle things with that Zhang fellow." Wang Yingfang was also annoyed. This is a small matter that can be resolved by both sides talking. "Senior Marshal Sister, you don't appreciate my kindness. Do you want to fight until there is blood?" The Taoist nun snorted, "Small matter? Although my Taimi Mountains Feng clan's name isn't well known, it still has several thousand years of inheritance. How could we have the intention to apologize?" Wang Yingfang shook her head. She knew the background of the other party. Previously, Mount Taimi had also produced a few extraordinary great demons, but now, there were only 2 core formation cultivators left in this lineage. They could barely hold up the situation, but they still spoke so arrogantly. She thought to herself, "I haven't seen this Feng Mei for more than 100 years and I didn't think she was this unreasonable before. Why is she pestering me now? Before she became Tao Jinren's disciple, wasn't she also like this? Before she became Jinren Tao's disciple, wasn't she also someone who didn't care about anything when blood rushed to her head? It was only because she practiced the Xianmen Heart Sutra in the Immortal Palace that she hid this evil aura and hid her demonic nature. When she thought up to here, her heart seemed to have become clearer, and she seemed to have comprehended some profundities. When she calmed her mind was already clear, and she faintly felt that the obstacles on her path of cultivation seemed to have reduced slightly. She looked carefully again and saw that there was a layer of black air between this Taoist nun's eyebrows. She was trapped in a tribulation without being aware of it. Her heart was like still water. She smiled and said, "If that's the case, Senior Marshal Sister Feng can go. I promised fellow Taoist Zhang, but I can't let him go." The Taoist nun was furious. She pointed at Wang Yingfang and said, "Wang Yingfang, don't think you can do whatever you want just because you've become Tao Jinren's disciple. You need to know that someone is going to punish you. I'm an honored guest invited by your 4th martial brother Yang Lin. If you don't let him go, I'll ask him to come talk to you." Wang Yingfang smiled and waved her horsetail whisks, saying, "See the guest out." The Taoist nun was suddenly pushed up by a gust of wind. Her vision darkened and she involuntarily retreated. When she opened her eyes, she found that she was already outside the Swan Goose Monastery. She didn't know how she got out. She was shocked and thought, "Wang Yingfang has learned this kind of Xianmen, I'm not her match." Luckily, her 4th martial brother Yang Lin has some disagreements with her. I'll ask him to come and uphold justice. She turned around and got on top of the cloud. After a few steps, she saw a young Taoist sitting in the cloud. She took a closer look and said happily, "Fellow Taoist Yang, you're here too?" Do you know that your senior martial sister bullied me? You must help me with this. The Taoist smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Feng, how do you want me to help you? The Taoist nun said with hatred, You only need to hand over that Zhang Yan to me. The Taoist was expressionless and said, You must make things difficult for that fellow Taoist Zhang? The Taoist nun's heart was filled with hatred, so she didn't hear anything strange. She gritted her teeth and said, Yes. The Taoist let out a loud laugh and waved his sleeve in the air, throwing out a white jade snake-like ring with its head and tail. The snake-like ring wrapped around the female Taoist's head. The female Taoist was caught off guard by the snake-like ring around her neck. She immediately lay down and turned into a white-bellied, black-winged, white-tailed swift. The Taoist went up and grabbed the jade ring. He sneered, You're just a feathered animal. You don't know the heavens and the general situation. Fellow Taoist Zhang is of great importance. How can you disturb him? With that, he picked up the jade swallow and walked towards the clouds in large strides. In a flash, his figure disappeared. Wang Yingfang didn't see it with her own eyes, but she seemed to know about it. She wrote a Taoist talisman and sent it to Zhang Yan to inform him that it was over. Zhang Yan looked at the talisman but didn't take it to heart. He wanted to protect the main palace for Tao Xinren. If someone wanted to make things difficult for him, it would be difficult for Tao Xinren. Therefore, he didn't need to think too much about it. He only needed to meditate and adjust his breathing, waiting for the right time to come. Another 5 days passed and a thunderous sound came from the sea. The red glow shone through the restriction and shone on the island, making everyone's face feel warm. Zhang Yan knew that the immortal abode was about to come into the world and was trying to break through the original restriction. The sound that resounded through the East Sea was the first restriction being broken. He shouted, Fellow Taoists, please follow me. He flew up into the sky and released a small boat that was given by Lady Yin. He stood on top of the inner treasure pavilion and 2 streams of smoke descended. Demon King Jun Miao and Lu Junbai landed on the top of the boat and stood on both sides of him. Zhang Yan steered the ship and flew into the sky. He looked around and saw that there were thousands of lights on Mystic Spirit Island. The cultivators rode on their mystic instruments and gathered at one place. The waves on the sea and the clouds above were pushed away by this spiritual spiral. However, after that sound, there were no more movements on the surface of the sea. This immortal mansion was erratic and not confined to one place, so they didn't know where to go. The crowd of cultivators was at a loss. At this moment, a whistling sound came from the sky, and a golden talisman flew over. It transformed into a dancing 5-colored divine bird that led the way. Zhang Yan saw that it was Tao Xinren who was leading the way and nodded. He controlled the boat and followed the 5-colored divine bird with thousands of cultivators. In order to protect Taoist Master Tao's mansion this time, he put away the great ocean boat and mixed in with the many cultivators, not very conspicuous. Looking around, he saw a burly Taoist about 10 feet tall riding a 6 cranes flying heaven chariot leading the way. Behind him on the left was Wang Yingfang riding a wild goose, and on the right was a young Taoist riding a huge eagle. Behind them were a group of 3rd-generation disciples. Looking around, Wei Lihua was among them. As if sensing his gaze, she couldn't help but turn back and smile at him, but her eyes were slightly apologetic. Zhang Yan also nodded in greeting. He thought to himself, I think the leader should be Tao Xinren's 2nd disciple, Zhao Jingqing. The other young Taoist should be Yang Lin, who is ranked last. He understood that even though Gualai was Tao Xinren's 1st disciple, he was only a small golden core cultivator. Therefore, it was not his turn to take care of this matter. He didn't know where he was hiding. At that moment, Lu Junbai sighed. These Taoists were invited by Tao Xinren, right? If we can seize the immortal abode in one go, no one will be able to stop Clear Feather Sect from opening. Monster Queen Jun Miao looked around and said, Tao Xinren is so influential. I even saw a few monster kings. They are all powerful figures in the Eastern Sea. Lu Junbai snorted and said, if it wasn't for the immortal abode, why would they be willing to come? Where the benefits lie. Zhang Yan smiled. 20 years ago, when Tao Xinren's Yuaning Dharmakaya went to the sea, he already had a plan. He ordered his disciples to make friends with people from all walks of life. Now that he was using the immortal abode as bait, all he needed to do was to take the lead. Naturally, these people would flock to him like a flock of ducks. The colorful bird that led the way traveled for about 1,000 miles. Suddenly, it swayed its body and dived into the sea, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Zhao Jingqing, who was at the front, waved his Taoist robe and stopped the 6 cranes flying heaven chariot. He said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, the immortal abode is right here. I believe it will be born soon. When the time comes, the immortal palace's decree will fly out and choose its owner. First, set up the prohibition talisman door to prevent enemies from robbing it." His voice rumbled. The clear feather sect's disciples behind him heard him. Under the lead of Wang Yingfang and Yang Qi, they went to different places to set up talismans and formations. When the monster kings and rogue cultivators from the Eastern Sea saw this, they followed suit. They led their disciples to different places and set up the formations. Although it seemed like they were prepared, compared to the clear feather sect's orderly and unhurried way of doing things, it seemed a little messy. Zhang Yan was very clear that these prohibition formations could only be used for temporary protection. When the immortal palace's decree flew out to find its owner, if someone came to fight for it, they would still have to rely on their own cultivation base to determine the winner. However, this time, he only came to protect the main palace. There were 2 core formation cultivators behind him, so he didn't need to set up any prohibition formations. Thus he stood still. However, Wei Lihua kept paying attention to this place. When she saw that everyone was setting up the prohibition formations, but only Zhang Yan didn't move, she thought to herself, "I heard that junior martial sister Fu Hongxian didn't take good care of fellow Taoist Zhang last time, and someone even came to pick a fight with him. It's my fault. Fellow Taoist Zhang just came here, so he probably didn't prepare any celestial tools. Although there are powerful prohibition formations on his sea boat, it can't raise clouds and cover his body. Wait for me to give him a celestial tool as an apology." She waited until she was done arranging the Dharma gate here, then flew over with a streak of light. When she arrived in front of Zhang Yan, she bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I left in a hurry last time, so I didn't treat you well. It's my fault. I see that you don't have any celestial tools to set up formations with you. I have one here, please accept it. Target equals _blank. Chapter 202. The Battle of Dao, What's Right or Wrong? After Wei Lihua finished speaking, she heard someone calling her from behind. She nodded and handed the array flag to Zhang Yan, smiled, and turned to leave. Lu Junbai looked at her back and said, "This Taoist is kind." Monster Monarch Junhue looked at Zhang Yan and pursed her lips into a smile. "Taoist Zhang, I'll go and set up the array flag for you, lest that girl worries again." Zhang Yan smiled and handed over the array flag. Monster Monarch Junhue took it and went to set up the array. At this time, in addition to the cultivators from Mysterious Spirit Island, there were also many itinerant Taoists who sensed the activity of the mansion and rushed over in groups of 2s and 3s. However, they were afraid of the thousands of cultivators gathered here and floated far away, not daring to come closer. Monster Monarch Junyu carefully arranged the array flags and turned back to the bow. She looked into the distance and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, even the people from the Eastern Sea Reef Prefecture are here. Is such a prestigious clan also coveting the immortal abode?" Lu Junbai snorted. "The disciples of the Reef Prefecture are also divided into those who are direct and those who are not concubines. Not everyone can obtain the orthodox teachings. Not to mention them, even the disciples of the big sects, if they don't have a Tao field like Taoist Zhang, would have to live under someone else's roof. This time, there are 49 immortal mansions. As long as you obtain one of them, you will be able to establish your own sect and live freely. You will no longer be restricted to one island or one place, and you will be able to overcome many obstacles on your path to Tao. How can they not be tempted?" Monster Monarch Junyu nodded silently. It was not easy for an itinerant cultivator like her to reach the core formation realm. If she did not have a good cave abode where she could store her chi and protect her life, it would be extremely difficult for her to reach the nascent soul realm. For hundreds of years, The 18 monster monarchs of the East Sea seemed to be famous, but in reality, none of them could break through this shackle. This showed how difficult it was to take this step. Demon Monarch Junyu had cultivated for more than 400 years and had personally seen several elders die after their lifespans came to an end. No matter how powerful they were, they would still turn into a pile of dust. She thought to herself, fellow Taoist Zhang has a blessed heavenly abode in his possession now. If I can help him properly, he might accept me into his abode to cultivate. At this moment, her expression suddenly changed. She looked towards the south and saw a wisp of white smoke coming towards them. At the same time, joy appeared on Lu Junbai's face as he said, "My sister is back." After Lu Mainyang sent her daughter to be reincarnated, she wanted to meet up with Zhang Yan. However, she did not know the way and could not find her way to Mysterious Spirit Island. Not long ago, she sensed the aura left behind by Lu Junbai and rushed over. Zhang Yan was also in high spirits. Lu Mainyang's return at this time undoubtedly increased his chances of protecting the Immortal Palace. Lu Mainyang was originally a core transformation third-stage cultivator. When she flew over, the commotion was not small and naturally attracted the attention of the Clear Feather Sect disciples. Even Zhao Jingqing and the others looked over. Zhang Yan hurriedly sent a talisman over. When the Clear Feather Sect disciples saw it, they knew it was one of their own, so they stopped and ignored it. Lu Mainyang was dressed in white and her black hair was tied up with a golden band behind her shoulders. At this moment, she rode on a cloud and arrived in front of Zhang Yan. She first looked at Lu Junbai and Demon Monarch Junyu, then she bowed and said happily, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, Mainyang is really grateful to see my younger brother and junior sister Jing escape today." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow. He said, "You're welcome. Fellow Taoist Lu, you came at the right time. Today, I want to seize an immortal abode and need your help." Lu Mainyang did not ask for the reason. She only said solemnly, "Mainyang will not refuse." Lu Mainyang was also one of the 18 demon monarchs of the sea. Naturally, many people recognized her. From afar, demon monarch Xian Tong's sister, Tong Ying, saw them and said strangely, "Big brother, look over there. It's demon monarch Jing and demon monarch Lu. Who is that Taoist? How can he order these three people around? Could he be a new disciple of Tao Jinren?" Demon monarch Xian Tong's eyes flashed. He said in a low voice, "That person is Zhang Yan." Tong Ying was dumbfounded. She looked at Lu Mainyang and Jing Miaojuan standing behind Zhang Yan. She was shocked and secretly rejoiced. If she did not listen to her brother and fought with Zhang Yan that day, the result would be unpredictable. Another loud bang sounded on the sea. This was the second restriction of the immortal abode being broken. Everyone could hear it clearly. The immortal abode was not far from here. The disciples of Clear Feather had erected the flag gate and carried out a cloud raft. Zhao Zhengqing walked out and ordered his disciples to set up the table, light the incense and candles, and then stood under the cloud raft. Wang Yingfang and Yang Qi also stood solemnly by the side. The rogue cultivators around saw Clear Feather's actions and knew that it was to welcome Tao Jinren's arrival, so they all focused their attention to watch. In a moment, there was a whistling sound in the sky. Guolai rode a pring and opened a path. When he reached the sky, he dodged to the side and shouted, "Clear Feather disciples, what are you waiting for? Greet the patriarch." 3 core formation cultivators and hundreds of their disciples stood respectfully and did not dare to move. They said in unison, "Greetings, patriarch." Above them, the clouds parted and splendor sprinkled down. There seemed to be ethereal celestial music. Tao Jinren arrived on a blue lawn. He was surrounded by green smoke and colorful mist. 9 heavenly cranes followed him like white snow. Behind him were 2 fair-skinned boys riding on the cranes. One of them held a golden ring and a silver bell and a sealed incense burner. The other held a longevity pine tree and a rui whisk. Tao Jinren came up to the cloud raft. When he sat down, he said with a smile, "The immortal abode is about to appear. There will definitely be strong enemies coming to snatch it. Are you all ready?" Zhao Jingqing hurriedly went forward and said, "Benefactor, Disciple has already arranged everything according to your orders. All the flag gates have been erected. I dare not make the slightest mistake. At this moment, the rogue cultivators outside suddenly became restless. They saw the sea in the distance churning and stirring up strong winds and heavy rain. The wind and clouds changed color and thunder rumbled. A thick dark cloud rolled over. Tao Xinren smiled and raised his head. His eyes emitted divine light. 2 light pillars, one green and one white, flew up to the clouds. In an instant, the layer of haze was dispelled and the sky was once again revealed. The strong winds and clouds in front of them also dispersed. 4 flying ships appeared. On each ship stood a Yuanying Xinren. Their bodies were faintly glowing and auspicious mist. Behind them, there were hundreds of cultivators riding on light and clouds. It was a majestic scene. In this open sea, it was not easy to see a Yuanying Xinren. Now, other than Tao Xinren, there were actually 4 of them. The surrounding rogue cultivators looked at each other in shock and quickly avoided them. At this moment, there was a sound like falling rain. More than 1,000 spirit geese flew out from the ship and gathered together to form a wild goose bridge. The 4 Zenrens each flew out in a ray of light and stepped on it. They slowly walked forward. Qiu Daoren pointed below and sneered. 3 Taoists, today, Tao Zhenhong was deceived by the true spirit of the celestial abode. He did not know the heavens and did not avoid the calamity. Today, if we want to kill him, we can take advantage of the situation and take his life. We will return the celestial abode and complete our Tao. Yifeng's brows moved and killing intent appeared on his face. He said, "What Zhenren Qiu said makes sense. The heavens' secrets are in my hands. I am about to settle the situation and kill this bastard." Taoist Lin only sighed and shook his head. Standing on the left of the 3 of them was a young Taoist. His skin was white like a virgin and his eyes were lively. He heard this and chuckled. He said, "If you don't take what heaven gives you, you will be punished." Tao Xinren saw the 4 of them and he stood up calmly. He greeted them from afar. "For Taoists, how have you been?" Among the 4 of them, Qiu Daoren and Yifeng sneered and stood still. Taoist Lin hesitated for a moment and did not move. The young Taoist returned the greeting and chuckled. He said, "Tao Xinren, both you and my Wudang spiritual hall have set up sects on the East Sea. I, Pei Huan, don't want to make things difficult for you. However, I owe Taoist Yi a favor, so I have to come. If I have offended you today, you can go all out and I won't blame you." Tao Xinren also smiled. He said, "Taoist Pei is a straightforward person. I still want to be useful to see the great Tao. If we fight, I won't be distant." Old Taoist Qiu's eyes were cold. He looked up and saw thousands of lights shining behind Zhenren Tao. The ships were lined up for 100 miles and the flags were divided. They were already waiting in formation. Other than the hundreds of disciples from his sect, there were 6 other spiritual lights that rushed into the sky. They were arrogant and demon clouds were rolling. They were obviously the demon kings of a region. This momentum shocked him, and he thought to himself, "This Tao Zhenhong really knows how to win people's hearts. How did he manage to gather so many people?" Although he also had the help of 2 to 3 monster kings, they paled in comparison to Tao Xinren. He shouted and took a step forward. He pressed his fingers together and pointed forward. He shouted from afar, "Tao Zhenhong, you have repeatedly broken the rules. Sect Master expelled you from the sect. He wanted you to repent, but not only did you not repent, you even wanted to set up your own sect. Now that you haven't given up, you want to snatch the celestial abode on the sea. Your disciples are innocent, but they have been implicated by you." Tao Xinren looked calm and said, "In the battle of Tao, there is no right or wrong. If Taoist Qiu wants the celestial abode, there is no need to find another excuse. It is just a waste of your breath. Just come and fight." Qiu Daoren was speechless by Tao Xinren's words. He wanted to fight, but it was not the best time yet. He could only snort and wave his sleeves in anger. Yifeng took a few glances and said in a low voice, "Taoist Qiu, those wandering cultivators are only here for the benefits. They are just relying on Tao Zhenhong's power. As long as we kill him, they will disappear. Taoist Qiu doesn't have to worry. Qiu Daoren said coldly, "These people are just toys in my demon-subduing circle." Taoist Master Pei looked at the two of them and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, don't worry too much. My Wudong Spiritual Hall has brought more than 100 disciples here this time, and there are also a few core formation cultivators among them. They are evenly matched and can compete with Tao Jinhong." Taoist Lin frowned and suddenly said, "But Chongyue True Temple has not appeared yet. We need to be wary of them playing tricks on the side. Don't let others take advantage of us." The three of them nodded and said, "Of course we will be careful." After the four of them finished their discussion, they divided the Wild Goose Bridge. They each took a corner and sat with their eyes closed, waiting for the celestial abode to appear. Target equals _blank. Chapter 203. While the two sides were facing off on the ocean, Shen Minggu was standing in a patch of yin energy and looking down. This yin qi was neither mist nor cloud. It was formed from the blade qi of the yin-slaying saber on his body. He used it to hide and restrain his qi. Even a nascent soul Taoist master might not be able to see through his body if they did not look carefully. Cultivators who cultivated the origin yin-yang flying blade were usually good at offense and not good at defense. However, with this blade, he could come and go as he pleased and instantly move 100 miles away. Right now, his cultivation level wasn't high enough. Once his cultivation level was high enough, the blade spirit would listen to his commands and he wouldn't need to care about cultivators of the same cultivation level. However, if he wanted to maximize the power of this blade, he would need to drink fresh blood and barely be able to move the true spirit of the blade. Right now, he couldn't afford to offend a core formation cultivator, so he could only choose a mystic light realm cultivator. His eyes scanned around as if he was searching for prey. On the ocean boat, Seng Han, Xen Chanjin, Qiu Ju, Chu Jiu, and a group of mystic light realm disciples stood together and pointed at the people in front of them. "Is that person Zhang Yan?" Seng Han glanced at him and nodded his head, as expected of a disciple of a large sect. Such elegance isn't something normal cultivators can compare to. Xen Chanjin also looked over. Zhang Yan stood at the top of the oceanic boat, his demeanor imposing, his aura elegant and otherworldly. His black robes fluttered in the wind, as if he was riding the wind. His stature was a head taller than the others, and anyone could tell with a single glance that he was extraordinary. This was the same as what the Agarwood Hall disciple had described, so she was sure that the person who took the 7 absolute pillars was this person. Although she came here to take back the treasure, she felt that Zhang Yan was a rare opponent after seeing him. If she could fight with him, she would definitely be able to improve herself. Therefore, she touched the hilt of her sword and said quietly, "This person is my opponent." Seng Han smiled casually and said, "Since Junior Martial Sister Xian has chosen him as her opponent, we will naturally let him go. However, this person seems to be very strong, so you should be careful." Xen Chanjin gently nodded. Zhang Yan saw the dispute between the 5 spiritual masters and thought that if this Tao Jinren was able to suppress these 4 Yuanying spiritual masters, then everything would be fine. If he was unable to suppress them and one of them came out, then his side would not have an easy time. At this time, a thunderous sound suddenly came from 10 miles away, and a rainbow light suddenly appeared. In an instant, half of the sea and sky were dyed red. The hearts of everyone on the sea tightened when they heard this. However, the rumbling did not stop. It was like the beating of war drums, one sound after another. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, there was another explosion that seemed to push the mountains and overturn the seas. It was as if the heavens and the earth had been shaken. Suddenly, the sea surface was filled with golden light, and the waves rolled. Then, the waves parted, and celestial music came from underwater. 49 immortal palaces slowly floated up to the surface of the sea, each with copper pillars and golden roofs, covered with glazed tiles, and connected by corridors and bridges. Golden red light illuminated the sky, and auspicious purple mist supported the jade steps. The auspicious beasts on the roofs all breathed out mist, and an exquisite talisman could be seen flying in the air, emitting a brilliant golden light. If they could obtain this talisman, they would be able to refine the palace and use it for their own use. The cultivators at the scene were all envious, eager to make a move. However, at this moment, the 5 Yuanying spiritual masters were sitting still as if they did not hear it, so no one dared to come forward to fight for it. These 49 immortal palaces were wrapped in a layer of immortal qi, and from the appearance, they all looked similar, and it was hard to tell which was the best. However, Zhang Yan had received the secret message from Tao Xinren beforehand, so he knew that only one of the palaces was where the master of the palaces was located. He looked up, and his gaze finally stopped on an inconspicuous palace at the southeast corner, and his eyes could not help but slightly narrow. At this moment, Tao Xinren stood up, and the boy beside him handed him a horsetail whisk. He took it and waved it, pointing to a distant palace, and shouted, "Fellow Taoists, of the 49 immortal palaces of the Purple Jade Immortal Palace, Clear Feather Sect will only take one, and the rest can be taken by yourselves." As soon as his voice fell, the disciples of his sect, led by Zhao Jingqing, bowed, and then chose a palace to land in. Behind him, Wang Yingfang and hundreds of sword lights all followed. When Clear Feather Sect's disciples moved, the 6 monster kings in the formation also did not want to be left behind, and they led their disciples to jump into the formation, and each took a palace. The wandering cultivators on the sea could not hold back, and they surged from all directions, trying to snatch one of the immortal palaces, and it was quite noisy. The monster kings and wandering cultivators that Tao Xinren gathered had an agreement beforehand, so they did not panic and their actions were orderly. However, these wandering cultivators swarmed forward, and it was chaotic, and many of them could not help but take action first. On the other side, the 4 perfected ones did not move immediately. Qiu Daoren closed his eyes and pondered for a moment, then he opened his eyes and said, 100 years ago, when Tao Zhenhong and I came here, he once obtained a star engraving plate from the Immortal Palace by accident, and it can find the location of the Quasi-Master Palace. We need to be careful of the maze he has set up. Yi Fengbo sneered, no matter what, we cannot let go of the immortal palaces that his disciples have their eyes on. Perfected Pei sneered, that's right, no matter how many places he has taken, just kill them all. If we don't use the power of the heavenly secrets to overturn Tao Zhenhong's sect, how can we get what we want? Qiu Daoren nodded slowly, and a ray of light shot out from his eyes, and he shouted, if that's the case, let's do it. Once the word, do it, was said, it was like a golden army galloping across the desert sea, overturning mountains, and overflowing with murderous intent. Hundreds of cultivators behind him surged forward like waves, and for a moment, flying swords and conveyances danced like snakes, bursting with thousands of splendor. Xen Chanjin, on the other hand, got off the sea boat at the first instance, and turned into a ray of white light, heading straight for Zhang Yan. Perfected Pei looked at Tao Zhenhong, and a hint of fierceness flashed in his eyes. He waved his sleeve, and a white rainbow shot towards the latter's face. Tao Xinren smiled and he said, fellow Taoist, slow down. He did not move his feet, and the jade rui in his hand gently swung, and the white rainbow shot to the side. Qiu Daoren shouted, and a black tiger with 4 feet treading on smoke flew over. He flipped on it, and with a roar he went up the cloud and came to the position of the north. He pointed with 2 fingers, and a ray of red light sprinkled down. Tao Xinren shook his shoulder, and a white light flew out from the top of his head, and condensed into the shape of a heavenly crane in the air, and pecked at the red light. The red light dodged nimbly to the side, and raised its head, hissing and hissing. Its eyes were vicious, and it was a strange snake that was 6 feet long, with red scales and a white belly, and a pair of wings on its abdomen. Taoist Lin frowned, and sighed to himself. He stamped his feet, and a vermilion bird with a colorful crown on its head leaped out of a flame. In the midst of its cry, it carried him up the cloud, and stood on the position of the west. Yi Fengbo had already rushed to the position of the east, and with a sneer on his face, he said, fellow Taoists, why are you still holding back? He shouted, and 2 qi spread out from the top of his head, and smoke and clouds filled the air. A light golden yuanying holding a jade lotus leaf, and stepping on a ball of clear qi, leaped out from the top of the door. The other three also knew that Tao Xinren's cultivation was far above theirs, and they could not fight him alone. They did not dare to hesitate, and all shook open the door on top of their heads and released their Yuanyin bodies. At this moment, the four of them each stood in a position and surrounded Tao Xinren. However, he did not panic, and with a shout, his body emitted a golden light, and with a stretch of his body, he also revealed his Yuanyin body. A Taoist was suspended in the void, and under his feet was a black tortoise. In his left hand was a rui, and in his right hand was a horsetail whisk. His body was accompanied by a heavenly crane and auspicious clouds, and a long snake that spat pearls circled around him. Behind him, there were two black and white swords, and the sword qi was flickering. Seeing this, the four Zenrens were all shocked and exclaimed, "Yuanyin body?" Qiu Doran's eyes showed a trace of shock. How did Tao Xinhong's cultivation reach such a level? Could it be, when one reached the realm of Yuanyin body, not only could the Yuanyin body leave the body, but it could also leave the body and travel the four seas. Also, he was only one step away from becoming a Zhenren of the grotto heaven. But if the body was here, then where did the real body go? At this moment, thousands of thoughts went through his mind, and he finally understood Tao Xinren's plan. He was the first to react, and he stomped his feet. Oh no! Tao Xinhong has probably already occupied the main hall, and he wants to use it to achieve Tao. We need to quickly find out where his real body is. Among the other three, Taoist Lin understood the reason the most, and now that he was reminded, he also came to a realization. He looked at Tao Xinren with shock and admiration, and sighed, "Senior brother Tao, good plan." If the main residents of the Celestial Palace had obtained the decree, it would only take 1 or 2 days to refine it. But to break through the seal by force, it would take at least 100 years of hard work. Although Tao Xinren had obtained the star engraving plate in the past, Qiu Daoren did not take it to heart because Tao Xinhong had been setting up sects all over the Donghua continent for the past 100 years and had absolutely no time to go to the sea, so Qiu Daoren was not worried. But he never thought that Tao Xinhong would be so scheming. He did not know when he had already achieved the Yuanyin body. Moving around the Donghua continent in such a high-profile manner was just to confuse others, to cover up the true purpose of refining the real body in the Celestial Palace. Today, he was only one step away from establishing his own sect. Tao Xinren knew that once they started fighting, this matter could not be hidden anymore. He laughed and said, "Friends, I'm afraid it's too late to know now." He waved his horsetail whisk, and a mist of light spread out. The heavenly crane, the long snake, and the black and white flying swords all flew down at the same time, pulling the four of them into the battle. Qiu Daoren fought with the two flying swords for a few rounds. Seeing that the opponent's sword aura was powerful, he could not escape for a while. He could not help but feel anxious. If he waited for Tao Xinhong to refine the Celestial Palace, wouldn't all his previous hard work be for nothing? And once the other party refined the Celestial Palace and set up a sect on the sea, he would most likely be able to use this mysterious opportunity to become the enlightened master of the grotto heaven in one go. He knew that at this moment, the only chance he had was to find the main residence of the Celestial Palace. But of the 49 Celestial Palaces, which one was the main residence? Qiu Daoren gritted his teeth and instantly made a decision. He counted the 9 primordial mysterious number in his heart to calculate the location of the main residence. If this number was calculated for a mortal, it might not be a problem, but the person he calculated was a cultivator, and the karma involved was huge. In a trance, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He actually had hundreds of years of cultivation wiped away. His originally black hair instantly turned gray, and his flesh also became old and wrinkled. Even the Yuanyin became hazy and thin, as if it would disappear with the wind. Taoist Lin cried out in surprise, "Senior brother." Yi Fengbo was also shocked and said, "Fellow Qiu, why are you doing this?" Enlightened Master Pei frowned, and seemed to be disapproving. Qiu Daoren forced the 2 flying swords away, and said shakily, "In the southeast corner, the position of the main residence." The 4 of them took the time to look in that direction, and saw that there were 8 palaces there, and the disciples of Clear Feather Sect, as well as the 6 great demon kings, were actually gathered there. It was obvious that they were prepared. Taoist Lin took a deep breath. Today, he could no longer keep the feelings of the past, and shouted loudly, "Disciples, listen up, use all your strength to snatch the 8 profound palaces in the southeast corner. Target equals, _blank. Chapter 204. After Taoist Lin gave the order, Spiritual Master Pei also waved his hand coldly and ordered all the disciples of Wudong Spiritual Hall to attack the southeast corner. However, just as these 2 people finished ordering the disciples, before they could say anything else, a crane and a snake arrived. They had no choice but to defend with all their strength and could no longer be distracted. At this time, they heard Tao Jinren recite, "The long river flows into the west of the sea, the water from the east separates the turbid air, crossing the torrential waves and covering the clouds, stepping on the astral dipper per step to grasp the profound theory." He waved his horsetail whisk and the scenery in front of him disappeared. Instead, a vast and boundless tide appeared and surrounded the 4 spiritual masters. The 4 spiritual masters only felt that the water was shaking their bodies and they could not stand steadily. They knew that they must have fallen into some kind of profound formation. However, they were Yuanian cultivators after all. They could control their minds and they could still hold on for a while. Previously, the 4 of them surrounded Tao Jinren and they were only evenly matched. Now that Qiu Doran's vitality was greatly injured, he was in a predicament of being suppressed. In this water, Tao Jinren seemed to be more at ease. However, he was not just attacking fiercely, he was very strategic. Qiu Doran was currently the weakest among the 4, so more than 60% of his attacks landed on him, forcing the others to help him. One had to know that they could barely maintain a situation where they could not win or lose. If Qiu Doran died, the 3 of them would not be able to escape with their lives. This kind of situation was equivalent to being led by the nose by Tao Jinren. However, at this time, the 4 spiritual masters could only grit their teeth and hold on, hoping that the disciples under them could find the main residence, find the location of Tao Jinren's real body, and stop him from refining the Immortal Palace main residence. However, these disciples did not know what was going on. They only thought that these 8 palaces were the most extraordinary, so they wanted to take them all down. Among them, there was a white smoke that took the lead and headed straight for the palaces occupied by the Pure Feather School. Its speed was several times faster than the others. Guolai, Zhao Jingqing, Wang Yingfang, Yang Lin, and the rest of the disciples were guarding one place. Seeing the white smoke approaching them unscrupulously, Zhao Jingqing frowned slightly. A stream of yellow smoke appeared above his head and condensed into a mysterious yellow dragon capturing hands several hundred feet in size, grabbing towards the white smoke like a small mountain. Unexpectedly, the cultivator within the white smoke showed no signs of fear. Not only did he not evade, he instead charged forward. In an instant, the 2 of them collided. With a loud bang, the yellow smoke rolled, and the mysterious yellow dragon capturing hand actually scattered. Although the hand condensed again after a moment, it could not stop the person from approaching. From the smoke, a handsome Taoist with long eyebrows that reached his temples walked out. He stood in the air with his hands behind his back, and there was a golden staff quaking mountain on his back. His eyes shone brightly and swept across the faces of Zhao Jingqing and the others. He said in a deep voice, "I am Wu Huanchen, a disciple of the Wudong Spiritual Hall. I have long heard that the 4 disciples of the Pure Feather School are all outstanding. Who wants to fight me first?" At this time, on another palace in the southeast corner, Demon King Xian Tong and his sister, Tong Ying, stood there. 9v cursed. The other monster kings were all escorted by guards, and they had hundreds of family members and disciples. However, he was the only one who didn't bring a single disciple. He looked at the decree in the mouth of the auspicious beast in a daze, but did not reach out to take it. Tong Ying walked to his side and asked curiously, "Brother, why don't you take it?" Demon King Xian Tong shook his head and sighed, "It's useless even if I take it now." Tong Ying was stunned and asked, "Why?" Demon King Xian Tong smiled meaningfully and turned to look. He touched the back of his hand and said, "He's here." Tong Ying hurriedly looked over and saw a cloud of smoke coming towards them. It was obviously a core formation cultivator. There were only Demon King Xian Tong and his sister here, so they would naturally be targeted by others. He smiled indifferently and said to Tong Ying, "Let's go." Tong Ying was shocked and said, "Big brother, go? How can we give up on the decree so easily?" Demon King Xian Tong looked at her indifferently and did not say a word. He got up and in the blink of an eye, he turned into a cloud of smoke and fled. "Big brother," Tong Ying was helpless. She looked at the decree pitifully, stomped her feet and flew away with Demon King Xian Tong. After a while, the core formation cultivator landed on the roof. He was surprised at first, then he was overjoyed. He did not expect to get the decree so easily. What he did not expect was that Demon King Xian Tong did not go far. Instead, he stood on the cloud and watched the battle as if he was an outsider. He had long understood that the outcome of this battle would be decided in a few hours. If Jinrentao's side won, he would be able to get back his decree. If he lost, the decree would be taken away by others. It was better to give it up first. Without the talisman order, he would not be targeted and no one would pursue him relentlessly. All he needed to do was to wait for an opportunity to strike. He seemed to have taken a step back, but in fact, he was out of the battle and could advance or retreat freely. As for the other 5 monster kings, they were either unwilling to give up on the decree they had obtained, or they were restrained by their disciples, so they could not be as decisive as him. Previously, Zhang Yan was mixed in with the many streaks of light and occupied an inconspicuous immortal palace in a corner, which was the main hall of the immortal palace. The Lu siblings and Demon King Junyu were in 3 different directions, looking around cautiously. Zhang Yan looked at the talisman floating in the mouth of the auspicious beast. This talisman was born when the immortal palace was born. If someone tried to take the talisman away, it would dissipate on its own and a new talisman would appear in the palace. He stretched out his hand and plucked off the golden talisman. After a quick check, he found that it was as Tao Jinren said. With this talisman, he could sense the location of every restriction in the palace. Originally, there were 365 internal restrictions. Now, 362 of them were gone, leaving only 3 that had yet to be broken. At this moment, Spiritual Master Tao's true body was hiding in the depths of the immortal palace, and he was forcefully refining the restrictions within the palace. Although this method was time-consuming, it could completely erase the traces left behind by the previous owner, and there would not be any future troubles. When these restrictions were gone, it would be the perfect time. The purpose of Zhang Yan's trip was to protect this decree and prevent others from taking it away, so that others would not be able to see through it. As for people sneaking into the palace to investigate, he did not have to worry. The last restriction was called the Mystic Light Illusion Array. Anyone who entered without the talisman would be lost. If Tao Jinren had not obtained the star engraving plate by chance, he would not have been able to enter the depths of the palace so easily. Zhang Yan paced back and forth on the ridge of the palace. He was thinking if he had missed anything. Suddenly, his expression changed. He reached into his sleeve and took out the primordial echoing stars 37-7 palace guard flags. He chanted a spell and threw it down. The moment the array flag landed, it formed an array. However, before it could spread out, it was repelled by a wave of spiritual qi. The spiritual qi around the palace surged and created a repelling force. It disrupted the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, making the array flag unusable. With a wave of his hand, he retrieved the array flag and nodded to himself. Although he could not set up an array, he had eliminated the possibility of others setting up arrays around here. Otherwise, it would be very troublesome. Suddenly, he looked up as if he had sensed something. He saw a ray of light flying straight toward him. The ray of light came close and disappeared. A woman in a long white dress appeared in midair. She had a delicate and pretty face, and her clothes were spotless, like a white lotus standing alone in the world. Her clear eyes were pure and without any impurities. She looked over quietly and said, "Brother Zhang, My name is Xen Chanjin of Yuan Yang sect. I'm not here for the immortal abode, but for the 7 terminal pillars. Zhang Yan was startled when he heard this. Then he smiled and said, I see. However, I can see that you are full of vigor and sword energy. I believe that regardless of whether I am willing to return this treasure, you will have to fight me. Xen Chanjin's expression remained calm even though Zhang Yendao had seen through her thoughts. She nodded lightly and said, Fellow Taoist is right. If my daughter wins, please return the 7 absolute pillars. If my daughter loses, then don't mention anything. Zhang Yan nodded and said with a smile, Since Brother Xen has such a wish, I can accompany you since I am free. Please. Although Zhang Yan looked relaxed, Xen Chanjin did not dare to be careless. With a clear shout, she pointed her finger and a ray of sword chi flew over. Zhang Yan smiled. Without moving his shoulders, a ray of light flew down from the top of his head and swept forward. The ray of light disappeared. Xen Chanjin's expression did not change. She touched her waist pouch and grabbed a ball of essence chi. She blew a mouthful of spirit chi upwards. With a clanging sound, this essence chi transformed into hundreds of sharp sword chi and swept over like a rain of light. Zhang Yan let out a shout. A ball of tricolored light appeared from the top of his head. However, as he descended, the sword chi could not get close to him no matter how hard they tried. Xen Chanjin's 2 moves were just probing. Her expression turned slightly serious when she saw that the light on Zhang Yan's body was condensed. She raised her wrist. 5 golden white sword rays flashed from her back, and a murderous aura spread out in an instant. She made a hand sign. The 5 flying swords spun into a ball and rushed toward Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. A ray of light flew out from between his eyebrows. As soon as it appeared, it showed a graceful posture. It twisted and turned in the air, chasing the wind and catching the shadows. It sprinkled out rays of starlight. With just 1 sword ball, it was able to take on all 5 flying swords. Zhang Yan had only exchanged blows with one of them. He could tell that Xen Chanjin was using the white tiger fiend light that he had experienced before. However, compared to Qin Qizhong that day, this woman had already turned the flying swords behind her into 5. Her cultivation was slightly higher. However, the current Zhang Yan could not be mentioned in the same breath as before. Xen Chanjin saw that she could not break through Zhang Yan's sword circle. She frowned slightly. With a thought, the 5 flying swords suddenly changed. They were no longer as orderly as before. Instead, they displayed a path of murderous sword moves. Rays of white light converged into sword rays that flickered erratically. They shuttled back and forth in the air like a rain of light. However, the attacks were continuous. In just a moment, Zhang Yan had taken on more than 100 sword attacks. He could also see that although Xen Chanjin's cultivation was higher than Qin Qizhong's, her swordsmanship was not as experienced. Under the opponent's storm-like sword rays, Zhang Yan still looked calm. He let out a long laugh and said, Fellow Xen, with just this sword attack, you can't beat me. With a thought, the sword ball suddenly turned into a ray of light. In an instant, it struck the 5 flying swords several times at lightning speed. It knocked away the sword rays and created a flaw. At the same time, the sword ball suddenly leaped and separated into a sword ray that went straight for between Xen Chanjin's eyebrows. Xen Chanjin was shocked. She hurriedly dodged. She only felt a coldness passing by her ear. When she reached out to touch it, a strand of her hair had already been shaved off. Target equals _blank. Chapter 205. Xen Chanjin was stunned speechless. That strike just now had shown that Zhang Yan was more skillful than her. If she wanted to win, there was only one way, and that was to use a sword formation. Thinking of this, she could not help but tighten her grip on the sword at her waist. The disciples of Yuan Yang sword sect were different from ordinary sword cultivators. They could use the sword board as sustenance to set up a sword battle formation. This was one of the killer moves of Yuan Yang sword sect. But once it was used, it could not be stopped until one side was dead. When Qin Qizhong was expelled from the sect, he was taken back into the sword board, which was equivalent to having one of his arms cut off. When he fought with Zhang Yan, his combat strength was actually greatly reduced. Otherwise, Zhang Yan might not have won so easily if they used a sword formation to fight. Xen Chanjin wanted to use the sword board at this moment, but after thinking for a long time, she could only sigh softly. She was able to discern that the sword strike just now was incomparably swift, and it was actually impossible for her to dodge. However, Zhang Yan didn't kill her, so she was able to escape calamity. In her opinion, it was probably because they were both disciples of the celestial sect of wonders that the other party had shown mercy. Moreover, they were just sparring, not fighting to the death. Since she had lost a move, if she did not know what was good for her and continued to pester him, it would be too shameless. Thinking of this, she took a deep breath and bowed to Zhang Yan. She said softly, "Daoist Zhang's sword art is superb. I am ashamed of my inferiority. From now on, I will not mention the 7 absolute pillars again. But this treasure belongs to senior brother Cho Kun of Shaoqing sect. You must be careful." Zhang Yan was a little surprised. He said, "So this treasure belongs to Daoist Cho. Thank you for reminding me. But with Daoist Cho's pride, even if he wants to get it back from me, he will have to wait until the 16 sects sword competition." Xen Chanjin said in surprise, "So you two have known each other for a long time. I'm worried too much." She looked deeply at Zhang Yan and said, "I hope to meet you again in the sword competition." Zhang Yan nodded with a smile. Xen Chanjin turned her head slightly and saw several rays of light coming towards them. The person in the lead was Zheng Han. She hesitated for a moment before pointing her slender finger behind her and said, "Brother Zhang, this senior brother Zheng Han is an expert in the Yin Ray flying needle of 4 stars. You must be careful." The hair on her temples was shaved. Although it was not a big deal, she did not want Zheng Han and the others to see her like this. After she finished speaking, she did not have the slightest intention to stay any longer. She bid farewell to Zhang Yan, stood up and leaped into the clouds, transforming into a white rainbow and flying into the sky. Neither Zhang Yan nor Xen Chanjin knew that there was a wisp of Yin Qi lingering in the sky while they were fighting. That Shen Minggu was hiding within, waiting for the two of them to fight to reach a critical moment before killing them in one fell swoop, using their blood as a sacrifice for the saber in his hand. However, from the beginning to the end, Zhang Yan and Reverend Xen Chan had not unleashed their true killing moves, so he could not find a suitable opportunity to strike. Seeing that Xen Chanjin had left, Shen Minggu could not help but sigh in his heart. He thought for a moment. Seeing that there were still rays of light coming from afar, he was not in a hurry to leave. He was still hiding in the dark, waiting for a good opportunity. Zheng Han, Chu Jiao, Qiu Ju and the others did not dare to act rashly without the orders of their elders, so they were a step slower than Xen Chanjin. However, at this moment when they got close, they saw that Xen Chanjin had already turned into a ray of light and left, while Zhang Yan was standing on the temple with his hands behind his back. No one knew who won and who lost. Zheng Han frowned. He knew Xen Chanjin's cultivation level. If he fought with this woman, although he was confident that he could win, he would not dare to say that he could win in just a moment. However, looking at Zhang Yan's appearance, it did not look like he had lost, so he could not see through him. He had been in Dao for more than 100 years, and his foundation was solid. He was only one step away from entering the core transformation realm. He was confident that among the 10 sects of Xian men, there were few who could match him among the disciples of the Xian light realm. Since Xen Chanjin had left, he wanted to go forward and challenge her to fight for this divine abode. However, when he looked behind Zhang Yan, he saw Lu Mainyang, her brother and monster monarch Jun Yu standing not far away. These 3 people were surrounded by smoke and had clouds accompanying them. They were obviously core transformation cultivators. He could not help but be shocked. He could not help but think, I was wondering why junior sister Xen left in a hurry. So that's why. This Zhang Yan has these 3 core transformation cultivators to help him. Junior sister Xen must have seen that things could not be done, so she did not want to stay here and left early. Seeing this situation, he did not dare to go forward rashly. Core transformation cultivators were not easy to deal with. Only one of the three of them would be able to kill all of them. He shook his head and turned around, intending to head elsewhere. At this moment, the Wudong Spirit Hall's Wu Huanchen was fighting with Zhao Zhengqing, Wang Yingfang, and the others with his disciples in the southeast corner. Killing intent filled the sky, sparks shot everywhere, and whirlpools surged. Those with weaker cultivations could not get close at all. The 100 or so disciples of the Clear Feather sect were using some kind of magic treasure. Under Guolai's lead, they set up a profound formation. Although they were surrounded by many cultivators, they did not panic. It was not something that could be broken in a short time. As for the other palaces, most of them were occupied by monster monarchs. The people fighting them were all core transformation cultivators of the Wudong Spirit Hall. At this moment, both sides were fighting fiercely. Zheng Han looked around and found that no matter where he went, a mystic light realm cultivator like him couldn't interfere at all. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart, "What's so special about this celestial palace in the southeast corner? Why do the masters want to take down all the palaces here? If it was somewhere else, I'm afraid we would have already obtained a few divine abodes." Right at this moment he suddenly felt irritated and nauseous. After all, he was cultivating, so he hurriedly circulated his aura and dispelled this irritated feeling. Qiu Ju, Chu Jiao, and the others, however, turned pale. Their bodies swayed, and they adjusted their breathing several times before stabilizing on the flying light. Zheng Han suddenly looked up as if he had sensed something. He saw a ripple in the sky, and a dim yellow mist descended. It rolled on the sea for a radius of several hundred feet. Then, two cultivators, one male and one female, strangely appeared. These two people stood side by side, and they were both core transformation cultivators. The male cultivator had the appearance of an old man. His eyes were deep, and he had long hair without a beard. He wore a large red crane robe, and his expression was awe-inspiring. The woman had willow eyebrows and a slender waist. She wore a rainbow-colored feather robe, and she held a golden ring and ribbon. She was beautiful, but there was a murderous air between her brows. The old man's gaze swept across everyone's faces, and they all felt a chill in their hearts. His gaze finally focused on Zhang Yan's face, and he said in an extremely hoarse voice, "You are that Zhang Yan?" Under this pair of glowing green eyes that seemed to want to devour people, Zhang Yan did not show any fear. He said frankly, "Yes, I am. May I ask who you are?" The old man laughed coldly and said, "I am the little Zhou Mountain Qi cultivator Su Gongyuan. I heard that you were the one who captured my son Su Qiu, which caused him to be killed by Tao Zhenhong's disciples. Today, I will deal with you first, then I will go and kill old man Tao's disciples as a sacrifice for my poor son." Lu Mainyang came to Zhang Yan's side with a solemn expression and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Yang, although this person is from the Su clan of Chongyue True Temple, he is a disciple of the Nine-Piece sect, one of the 6 demon sections. His cultivation base is only higher than mine, so you must be careful." Su Gongyuan looked over and said in a deep voice, "Lu Mainyang, you are here too. What, are you trying to stop me from taking revenge?" Lu Mainyang bowed to Su Gongyuan and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist Su, I am indebted to fellow Taoist Zhang. If you want to cause trouble for him, you will have to go through me first." Su Gongyuan's eyes flashed with ferocity. He stared at her and said, "Lu Mainyang, although you are one of the 18 demon monarchs of the East Sea, you are nothing to me. If you insist on seeking death, I will help you." The woman next to him said in a shrill voice, "Master, there is no need to talk to them. Whoever wants to stop us from avenging our son will be killed as well." Su Gongyuan sneered and his green eyes flickered. He said, "My dear, you are right. Never mind, I will take care of these eyesores first before going after that junior." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly frowned and shouted, "How dare you!" With a wave of his hand, a yellow smoke flew out from his sleeve and blocked in front of the woman next to him. A clear light shot up and shone into the yellow smoke, but it could not penetrate it. After a few flashes, it dissipated on its own. Lu Junbai put away the ancient mirror in his hand and sighed inwardly. When Su Gongyuan appeared just now, he had already sensed that something was wrong, so he quietly hid to the side. He had originally planned to catch Su Gongyuan off guard and first use the mystery within the barrier treasure mirror in his hand to capture the woman. If he were to make a move later, his chances of winning would be slightly higher. He thought that he had done it secretly, but who knew that he was still discovered by the other party? However, this action angered Su Gongyuan. He raised his hand and pointed. A Li Yuan flying knife suddenly appeared in midair and slashed towards Lu Junbai's neck. Lu Mainyang knew that her brother alone was no match for this person. She opened her mouth and blew out a breath of Dan Sha Qi. This breath flew 3 feet away and turned into white feathers that fluttered in the air like flowers. They danced in the air and blocked the flying dagger, preventing it from falling. At the same time, the woman next to Su Gongyuan leaped and turned into a wisp of smoke. She wanted to find Zhang Yan. However, before she could reach Zhang Yan, a long spear suddenly stabbed out from the side. The tip of the spear radiated with a sharp aura, causing her to have no choice but to dodge to the side. This wisp of smoke circled around the battlefield and gathered in another place. The woman screamed, "Jing Miao Jun, do you want to get involved in this mess too?" Monster Monarch Junyu said softly, "Chen Liang, no need to say more. With me here, I will not allow you to harm fellow Zhang." The woman was furious. "Fine, let's see how long you can stop me." Monster Monarch Junyu did not make a sound. She shook the spear in her hand and it made a whistling sound as it pierced towards the woman's face. The woman hurriedly used the ribbon in her hand to block the attack. However, Monster Monarch Junyu's spear was relentless and soon she was exhausted. She had no choice but to retreat more than 100 feet before she was able to withstand the attack. Zheng Han, who was watching from the side, was overjoyed when he saw the 5 of them fighting. Originally, there were 3 core formation cultivators in the residence under Zhang Yan's feet. Other than the Clear Feather sect, it was the most dangerous place to provoke. However, as luck would have it, Su Gongyuan had come to kill them. For a moment, the 3 of them were restrained. At this moment, in his eyes, Zhang Yan was alone and could not do anything alone. This was the perfect opportunity to interrogate the Immortal Palace Talisman. This was a heaven-sent opportunity. If he did not take advantage of this, when would he be able to do so? Without uttering a single word, he controlled the Xuanji Yin Ray flying needle and thrust it toward Zhang Yan. Target equals _blank. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.